Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into something a little more lace-covered, judgmental, and emotionally exhausting. We're diving into the twisted, ruffled, absolutely brutal world of Victorian weddings. Forget romantic strolls and candlelit vows. This was an era where getting married was less about love and more about dowries, deception, and decorative trauma. You think planning a modern wedding is stressful? You wouldn't last a single corset-crushed hour in 1850. Before you tuck yourself in, give this video a like and subscribe, but only if you're ready to commit. Till death do us algorithm. And drop a comment telling me your time zone or what time you're listening. I love seeing if you're pre-sleep scrolling or wide awake in existential dread. Now, dim the lights. Let the hum of your fan become a distant Victorian carriage. And let's descend into a world of lace, lies, and the occasional fainting bride. Congratulations! You've just been betrothed in the year 1854. You don't know it yet, but your identity is about to be steamrolled by lace, etiquette, and every painfully silent dinner you'll endure for the next 5 decades. The good news, you're marrying into a respectable Victorian family. The bad news, you now belong to them. You, your reputation, your waistline, and any romantic notions you might have had about love, all neatly bundled up and tied with a pastel satin ribbon that will later be repurposed for curtains. If you're the bride, you're barely 20, pale, and presumably silent. If you're the groom, you're just old enough to not be suspicious, and young enough to still pretend this isn't a business merger with cake. Your engagement was not a romantic moment under a starlit gazebo. It was a heavily negotiated transfer of property and expectations. Your father smiled a little too wide. Her mother nodded like she just successfully sold livestock. No one asked if you loved each other. That's not the point. In fact, please stop asking that. It's making the servants uncomfortable. Your identity has already started to blur. If you're the bride, you're now a future Mrs. Moss first and a person second. Your handwriting is inspected. Your laugh is analysed. Your appetite is politely ignored. If you're the groom, you get slightly more room to breathe. As long as you earn at least £600 a year and don't speak French in public, anything outside that, and you might as well go herd sheep in a colony somewhere. You wake up the next morning not as yourself, but as the engaged one. Friends whisper about the match, like it's a social experiment. Older relatives nod solemnly, as if you've just agreed to go to war. Servants side-eye you with a blend of pity and mild curiosity, the way you might observe a pig walking into a butcher shop with confidence. And this is just the engagement. You haven't even picked the dress yet. From here on out, your name, your will, and your individuality will be dressed, redressed, pressed into formality, and pinned with discreet but unyielding social pins. Do you want to elope? That's adorable. Eloping is what desperate people do in novels, before dying of consumption. You're in a real world now. Victorian society. Love is optional. Appearances are law. Now take a breath. Try not to exhale too loudly. It might disturb the lace. You'd think being engaged would buy you some freedom. A little joy. A moment to bask in the idea of partnership. Not in Victorian England. Here, engagement is not the beginning of a love story. It's the start of a slow and meticulous identity demolition. Let's say you're the bride. Your life is now one long fitting. For dresses, for manners, for expectations that constrict harder than your corset. Overnight, you've been rebranded. You're no longer just Mary or Eleanor or Charlotte. You are the bride-to-be. You are a walking announcement, a symbol of your family's social ambitions, a bouquet with opinions that must be carefully pruned. Suddenly, your worth is measured in embroidery skills, posture, and how convincingly you can pretend to be happy while sitting still for 8 hours. You attend afternoon teas with strangers who smile like snakes and ask questions like, "Will the veil be imported or hand-stitched?" while judging the thickness of your earlobes as a proxy for fertility. You sit, smile, sip weak tea, and nod, while every sentence is gently laced with veiled judgment. You are training for your future life as a ghost in your own home. Your fiancé? He's off having cigars with your father, or playing billiards with people who pretend not to notice that he's quietly panicking over the rising cost of a respectable wedding breakfast. He's told to be a provider, a protector, a man, which mostly means buying a ring he can't afford, drinking brandy he doesn't enjoy, and pretending he's not terrified of spending eternity with someone who flinched when he touched her wrist. But let's get back to you, the bride. Your name will soon vanish. On paper, in conversation, even in memory. You will go from Miss Whatever to Mrs. Husband. Your first name will be used only in hushed tones, like an embarrassing secret. At parties, people will refer to you by your husband's full name, as if your entire self was melted down into a monogram. Your signature will change. Your initials will be redesigned. Your correspondence will be screened by in-laws who believe privacy is a sign of rebellion. You will be trained in the silent art of vanishing with grace. And don't get ideas about resistance. It's not the 21st century. There is no escape clause, no self-discovery sabbatical. If you run, you're a scandal. If you speak up, you're hysterical. If you ask for more than you've been given, you're a problem. And problems get solved in drawing rooms, with smelling salts and social exile. Even your body isn't yours. It's being prepped like a property for sale. Every inch groomed, cinched, bleached, and perfumed to reflect domestic virtue and virgin delicacy. Do you have opinions, interests, disagreeable hobbies like reading novels not approved by the vicar? Best keep those locked in a mental hope chest. You don't want to scare your new husband by being interesting. Your identity is no longer a story. It's a resume printed on lace. And if you're the groom, don't think you've escaped. Sure, you get to keep your name. You even get to speak at dinner. But your identity is also being suffocated, just in a different, slightly smokier room. You're not a man, you're an income, an estate, if you're lucky, a walking job description in a waistcoat. You're expected to provide, protect, and pretend like you aren't slowly drowning in obligation. The perfect Victorian groom is steady, emotionless, politely bored, and only slightly more expressive than a marble statue. Have doubts? Please don't. That's unsightly. Should you have feelings, God forbid, you must smother them with port, or bury them beneath discussions of fencing and shipping investments. Romantic yearning is for poetry, not parlours. You may gaze at your bride with admiration, just not too long. Passion is for Frenchmen and scandalous literature, not for men who wear pocket watches and understand the wheat market. You're not marrying a woman. You are marrying a duty. One you must perform with all the enthusiasm of a bank clerk reciting interest rates. You will be congratulated by other men. They'll shake your hand as if you've just bought a new mare. They'll say things like, "Well done," and "Fine choice." while secretly noting your fiancé's dowry and your family's reputation on their internal scorecards. No one cares if you're in love. They care that the chairs match the wallpaper at the reception. Love, in Victorian weddings, is a luxury. And luxury, as everyone knows, is inappropriate before the dessert course. Even your engagement gifts are coded. A tea set means domestic hope. A book of etiquette means you need refinement. A set of silverware says, good luck carving up your soul in polite company. And don't even glance at anything too romantic. A gift too sentimental could spark gossip. And gossip, in this world, is a full contact blood sport. By the time the invitations go out, hand calligraphed, delivered by footmen, weighed down by more paper than a modern tax return, you will no longer recognise yourself. You'll see your name printed on embossed cream stock, sandwiched between family crests and phrases like, the honour of your presence is requested, and you'll realise something chilling. This isn't a celebration. It's a coronation of conformity. You are being knighted with cutlery and duty, and the sword never leaves your shoulder. And let's not forget the legal side of things, because in Victorian England, marriage isn't just a vow, it's a transaction with the force of law. If you're the bride, prepare to surrender your legal identity upon marriage. That's right. Once you say I do, you no longer exist in the eyes of the law. You can't own property. You can't sign contracts. You can't even sue someone unless your husband gives permission. Or better yet, sues on your behalf, like a chivalrous ghost lawyer. In return, you get his name, his debts, and the opportunity to be referred to as his good lady wife in long, boring conversations about taxes. And if you're the groom, guess what? You've just acquired legal ownership of a person. Her wages, if he earns any, are yours. Her body, legally, is yours. Her children, should she survive childbirth, are yours. The courts will see her as a dependent, a shadow, a human extension of your household budget. No pressure. Now breathe, or don't. Victorian air is full of coal smoke and unspoken resentment anyway. Let's take a moment to reflect. You're not married yet. You're just engaged. But already, your soul is being held hostage by linen napkins and guest list politics. If you're the bride, people keep asking if you're excited. But the only thing you've been allowed to feel lately is appropriately grateful. Not too bubbly, not too moody. Certainly not nervous. Victorian women don't get nerves. They get pale and quiet and maybe faint gently in a chair if they absolutely must. Emotions are permitted, of course, as long as they're ornamental. But let's talk about roles, because in Victorian society, identity isn't something you build. It's something assigned, like a title in a poorly written play you can't escape. You're not a person anymore. You're the bride, the groom, the expectation. You play your part, wear your costume, and read your lines exactly as scripted. Deviate, and someone's aunt will have a coughing fit and need to lie down with smelling salts. Do you have dreams? That's adorable. Maybe write them in a diary no one will ever read and hide it under your embroidered pillow. Careers for women are a scandal. Ambition in a man is fine, as long as it doesn't interfere with punctual church attendance and rigid breakfast times. The point is not to live. The point is to appear as though you are fulfilling a meaningful life while quietly imploding under 6 layers of wool and expectation. And this, by the way, is the best case scenario, the ideal engagement. If you're poor or a servant or, God forbid, an actress, Your engagement isn't a celebration. It's a warning sign, a slip toward ruin. Your love story will not be printed on expensive parchment. It will be whispered behind fans, muttered in alleyways, or erased entirely. No dowry, no wedding, no property, no future, no virtue, no chance. The Victorian ideal is narrow and sharp and unforgiving. And even for the respectable couples, the judgment never stops. People will analyse your fiancé's cravat with the scrutiny of a microscope. They will dissect your engagement portrait for signs of immodesty, mental instability, or, worst of all, individuality. They will peer into your family history for evidence of scandal, madness, or insufficient linen cupboards. Every cousin, every branch of your bloodline is under the microscope. Did someone sneeze at the wrong time during communion? Did your uncle gamble with someone vaguely Irish? You're already halfway to social purgatory. Even silence can be damning. Say too little and you're seen as dull. Speak too much and you're unruly. Laugh at the wrong moment and you're hysterical. Fail to laugh when prompted and you're cold. There is no winning, just varying degrees of public survival. Let's say you manage to keep your head down. You learn to smile without showing too much tooth. You agree with your mother-in-law about table linens. You nod solemnly when someone brings up Queen Victoria's moral example, and you avoid any discussion of politics, emotions, or anything that might suggest you are, in fact, sentient. You are becoming Victorian. Congratulations. By this point, you're not even sure where your real self lives anymore. Is she in the mirror, behind the veil? Is he trapped inside the waistcoat, somewhere between the cravat and the crushing anxiety? Or did you accidentally leave your true identity in the glove box of a society carriage, never to be retrieved? And just to keep you grounded, here comes the announcement in the paper. A formal engagement notice, tucked between advertisements for starch and editorials on the declining moral fabric of chimney sweeps. It reads like a birth certificate and a legal contract combined. Mr. Jonathan T. Everly and Miss Margaret C. Whitcomb are to be joined in holy matrimony on the 14th of May in the year of our Lord 1854. Translation: you're being absorbed into lineage, into property, into duty. There's no more asking how you feel about any of it. You're part of history now. A name on a marriage certificate, a photo in a stiff album, a story told at boring dinners by people who can't remember your face but remember what kind of soup was served. And behind all this, the polite society, the lace gloves, the invitations and floral arrangements and moral hand-wringing, is a quiet truth that Victorian weddings never say out loud. You're not expected to be happy. Happiness is a risk. Happiness is chaotic. Happiness might lead you to question why your life has been stitched together by other people's expectations, like a dress you didn't ask to wear. No, the goal is something else. Respectability, stability, appearances, and eventually resignation dressed up as virtue. Even love, if it happens, is supposed to be quiet, dutiful, contained like a letter tied in ribbon and hidden in a drawer. Public displays of affection are vulgar. Emotional declarations are dangerous. Everything you feel must pass through filters of etiquette and grammar until they're safe to say out loud in front of the vicar. And if you think any of this gets easier after the wedding, it doesn't. This is just the prologue. Your role will change again, from bride to wife, from groom to patriarch, from individuals with hopes to bureaucrats of your own slowly disintegrating marriage. But that's for later. Right now, you're still preparing. being polished, softened, dismantled. Your individuality is a wrinkle, and in Victorian weddings, wrinkles must be ironed out. So here you are, not quite yourself anymore, practicing how to sign your new name, learning to suppress thoughts that might be considered eccentric, trying not to cry in your dressing gown because that might upset your future sister-in-law, and you're not sure if tears stain lace. Everyone tells you it's the happiest time of your life, but deep down, something cold and well-mannered whispers back. If this is happiness, why does it feel like mourning? Welcome to your Victorian wedding environment. A place where nothing breathes, nothing bends, and absolutely nothing can be described as relaxing. You have not entered a home. You have entered a social diorama, a scented mausoleum of expectations, where every stick of furniture has a name, and every hallway is another opportunity for someone to make a quiet, ruinous judgment about your wallpaper. Let's start with the parlour. The parlour is not for comfort, it is for performance. It exists so people can sit on furniture they're afraid to wrinkle and make pleasant conversation while dying slowly inside. There are exactly 4 correct ways to sit on a Victorian settee. None of them involve leaning back. Your spine should be a question mark made of tension. Your hands must rest demurely in your lap, unless you're holding something appropriately delicate, like a teacup, or your own unravelling sense of identity. The room smells like camphor, floral decay, and the kind of lavender that only grows in shops that also sell mourning veils. Light filters through thick lace curtains that are never opened fully, because direct sunlight is vulgar, and also because no one wants to be seen reading a novel with French words in it. On the mantel, there are framed daguerreotypes of stern relatives who look like they've never laughed. The fireplace is decorative for 9 months of the year, lit with coal for the other 3, and constantly spewing a faint sense of class anxiety into the air. The rug is Persian, or at least convincingly fake. Every thread in the room screams, "Look at how composed we are." This is where your wedding guests will first arrive. They will remove gloves like they're handling a live snake. They will sip weak tea and make approving noises about the embroidered cushions. They will comment on the symmetry of the room, as though it matters more than the future of your actual marriage. If you're the bride, you'll be brought in like an exhibit, polished, perfumed, and half petrified. Someone will say you look radiant, which is code for you've lost enough weight to be taken seriously. You'll sit, ankles crossed, nodding at comments about lace trim and family legacies while trying not to sweat through your underthings. You do not speak unless prompted. You do not contradict. You certainly don't laugh too loudly. Loud laughter, it's for children and Americans. Behind the parlour is the dining room. This is where more important judgments happen. At the table, over food that no one enjoys. The Victorian dining room is dark. Heavy curtains. Mahogany furniture. Walls painted in shades of forest funeral. There is a sideboard the size of a coffin, loaded with silver servingware, polished until it reflects your exhaustion back at you. The meal is a symphony of awkward silences and socially acceptable chewing. Cutlery is used with the precision of a surgical team. You must know which fork is for fish, which spoon is for soup, and which facial expression is best for pretending you like boiled tongue. If you're the groom, you are expected to talk about your plans. Financial ones, real estate ones. You must casually hint that you are stable, upwardly mobile, and incapable of emotional collapse. If you're the bride, you must nod supportively and avoid speaking with your mouth full, or at all. Bonus points if you say something modest and slightly self-deprecating. This shows you understand your role as a future domestic ornament. The room is quiet except for the clink of china and the sound of other people evaluating your marriage before it begins. This is not dinner. This is inspection. Let's move upstairs to your personal quarters, if they can be called that. The bride's bedroom is a cross between a dollhouse and a moral prison. Pale wallpaper, an iron bedstead, a vanity covered in hairbrushes, ribbons, and lotions that promise chastity through scent. There's a wardrobe filled with dresses you didn't choose, and nightgowns designed by people who believe desire is a medical condition. The window is small and curtained. Privacy is important, but so is airflow, which you won't be getting. The bed is stuffed with horsehair and judgment. Your pillow is embroidered with a verse about obedience. It's unclear whether it was meant to be comforting. It isn't. There are no books on the bedside table, at least none with characters who make choices. If you're caught reading something unladylike, it could reflect poorly on your family. So, you read your Bible, or a book of etiquette, or you stare at the ceiling and practice being married in your mind. If you are the groom, your room is slightly larger, slightly darker, and filled with furniture that doubles as metaphor. A large wardrobe for the weight of duty, a heavy desk for the burden of correspondence, a small whiskey decanter that everyone pretends you don't need. There's a bed, too. It's practical, not inviting. You're not supposed to find rest. You're supposed to rise early and inherit the empire. And no, you don't sleep together yet. That's for after the wedding. For now, you share longing glances in corridors and exchange letters through the post, even if you live under the same roof. Passion must be mediated through ink and servants. Let's step into the garden, or what Victorians call the grounds. It's manicured. That's not a compliment. Every hedge, flower bed, and gravel path is another monument to control. The roses are trimmed within an inch of their lives. The lawn is raked daily by a man who speaks only in apologetic nods. There are benches where you can sit with your future spouse and have extremely well chaperoned conversations about the weather, morality, and the production of jam. The garden is where photos are sometimes taken. You stand beside each other stiffly, not touching, staring just past the camera as if glimpsing the future and hoping it turns around. The gardener keeps his distance, watching with the quiet fatigue of someone who's seen too many marriages begin under forced smiles and die under cold dinners. And if you think the stifling nature of the house ends with architecture, think again. The air itself is choreographed. Smells are managed. Sound is managed. Even silence is curated. You must walk quietly. Speak softly. Don't let your shoes creak. Don't let your chair scrape the floor. Someone, somewhere, will hear it and raise an eyebrow so sharp it could slice a crumpet. In this environment, existence is a ceremony. Every action is filtered through protocol. You do not simply exist, you perform existing. There's a correct way to greet the maid, a correct way to enter a room, a correct amount of eye contact to make with a guest, depending on their age, gender, and how many pews they sit behind you in church. If you're exhausted, say you're a touch fatigued. If you're depressed, say you're feeling rather delicate. If you're angry, say nothing. Fury is impolite unless it's coming from a patriarch. The physical world around you is not built for comfort. It's built for display. You cannot put your feet up. You cannot lounge. You cannot sprawl or slump in existential collapse. The furniture isn't designed for human shapes. It's designed for postures approved by royal portraiture. There are bells in every room, but not for you. They're for summoning someone else. You don't ring them. You are rung for. And when they do ring, it means you're needed. For another fitting, another meeting, another hour of pretending you don't hear your future being narrated by other people's expectations. Even your bath, should you dare take one, is not relaxing. It's a production. A tub is brought in. Water is boiled by servants. Privacy is partial. You sit in lukewarm water, scented with rose oil and resignation. You are not cleansing yourself. You are preparing to be viewed. The mirrors in this house are not for reflection. They're for rehearsal. By now you've noticed something. This world, this curated, upholstered, lavender-scented prison, is not built around you. It's built around what people think you should be. You don't live here. You haunt it. You float from room to room like a domesticated ghost, permitted to touch nothing, disrupt nothing, and for God's sake, feel nothing stronger than mild approval. Let's return to the drawing room. No one draws in it. Not unless it's a pencil sketch of a dead canary done for morning practice. This is where visitors are brought before dinner, like suspects lined up for polite interrogation. Every detail in this room is a performance. The curtains are drawn just so. The chairs are positioned for maximum social geometry. The piano, whether or not anyone plays it, exists for show. Occasionally someone will sit at it and play 3 bars of something Chopin adjacent before remembering women should not be too skilled. Talent is lovely. Excellence is alarming. If you're the bride, this is where you will receive your future in-laws. You must smile, but not too brightly. You must speak, but not too boldly. You must demonstrate intelligence without threatening anyone, charm without flirtation, modesty without appearing dull, and warmth without perspiration. In short, you must embody every virtue at once, while seated upright on a chair designed to punish posture. If you're the groom, congratulations. You get to stand by the fireplace and say things like, "Yes, the weather has been strange," and "Certainly, railway expansion is quite something." You may be offered a cigar. You must accept, even if you hate cigars. Refusing makes you look unmanly. Enjoying it too much makes you look French. The room is quiet, but not silent. The ticking clock, the occasional sigh, the polite cough, all blend into the background music of subtle warfare. Every question is a test. Every compliment a trap. Your fiancée seems quite spirited, means she talks too much. You're looking pale, means you've gained weight. We're so pleased, means they are not, but won't say so until after the vows are signed and the inheritance is legally inaccessible. And you haven't even reached the ceremony yet. Let's pause and look at the architecture. It's not just walls and doors. It's social code made solid. The house has rooms for everything. Breakfast rooms, music rooms, retiring rooms, rooms for tea, rooms for pretending you don't know your uncle is a liability at dinner parties. Every space has a function. Every function has a rule book. You can't simply go into a room. You must have a reason, a purpose, a dress code. Wandering is suspicious. The doors are thick. The corridors are narrow. The floors creak just enough to announce your sins. There are portraits on every wall. Relatives you've never met, staring down at you with eyes that say, "Don't embarrass us." The ceilings are high because space equals status, but that space doesn't belong to you. it belongs to your ancestors. You're just borrowing air they've already judged. Now take a walk through the servants' areas. Or rather, don't. You're not supposed to be down there. That's the underworld. The invisible machinery that keeps this illusion running. The kitchens smell like boiling mutton and barely contained contempt. The laundry room is a war zone of linen, starch, and broken dreams. The servants move with speed and silence, trained to vanish when spotted, like polite phantoms in aprons. They see everything. They know when you argue, when you cry, when you sneak back into your room after pretending you were reading by the fire. But they will never mention it, because your dignity is part of their performance. You're not allowed to notice the labour. That would ruin the spell. Upstairs things aren't better, just more floral. Let's talk about bridal preparation, which, in theory, is about getting ready for your wedding. In practice, it's psychological exfoliation. Your skin will be scrubbed raw with rose water and regret. Your hair will be curled, pinned, and lacquered into something you don't recognise. Your dress will be layered onto you like armour for a battle you cannot win. And shoes. Let's talk about the shoes. They're satin, they're white. They're entirely unsuitable for walking on grass, cobblestone, or planet Earth. They're designed to look beautiful while making every step a small exercise in spinal punishment. You'll wear them once, smile through the pain, and later keep them in a box as a reminder that elegance and misery are often indistinguishable. Perfume is applied, not in abundance, but strategically. Behind the ears, on the wrists, at the base of the throat, all carefully chosen to say, "I am delicate," rather than "I am human." The wrong scent could brand you a libertine. The right scent suggests you were born exhaling violets. The veil is fitted, not for comfort, for optics. It must be long enough to suggest mystery, but not so long you trip and take the vicar with you. You will be reminded that Queen Victoria's veil was made of Honiton lace, and that yours is lovely in its own modest way. You will smile. You will not mention that the lace came from a drawer that smelled like mildew, an unspoken disappointment. If you're the groom, your preparation is less invasive, but no less suffocating. Your tailcoat must be pressed. Your gloves must be white. Your cravat must be tied with the care of a man preparing for public execution. You're allowed fewer layers, but more expectations. You must appear composed, financially secure, and just humble enough to pass for moral. You will be expected to deliver a short speech. Not too emotional, not too personal. Ideally something about family, community, and how delighted you are to be beginning this new chapter. You are not delighted, you are terrified, but you've practiced the lines. You've said them into your mirror. You've repeated them until they sound like they came from someone who still knows their own name. Now step into the bridal suite, the room where you will spend your first night as a married couple. It ornate, suffocating, decorated in the same hues as your anxiety. The bed is large and high, surrounded by curtains that could hide a conspiracy. The sheets are monogrammed. The lighting is low. There are flowers everywhere, because nothing says romance like a migraine. There is a fire in the hearth, crackling politely, but offering no warmth. The air is thick with rose petals and social pressure. You are expected to consummate, immediately, gracefully, without complaint. If you're the bride, you're likely unprepared. If you're the groom, you're likely overprepared and underqualified. Neither of you has been given real information. Just vague warnings and a handful of euphemisms that involve words like blossom and joining. There is a basin in the corner for washing, a small mirror, a chair that no one will sit in, a Bible on the nightstand, just to remind you that someone, somewhere, is watching. In this room, everything looks soft, but everything feels sharp. Let's step outside. Not for fresh air, there isn't any, but for a change of scenery. The garden paths are damp. The air smells like coal dust and faded privilege. The carriage waits at the gate, already prepared to whisk you away to your honeymoon. A short trip to Bath, or Brighton, somewhere respectable, somewhere scenic, somewhere you can continue pretending everything is fine in a slightly different parlour. You do not pack the bags. A maid does. You do not carry them. A footman does. You do not drive the carriage. That's the coachman. You don't even decide when to leave. That's your father's job. You simply exist. Neatly. Beautifully. Quietly. Every space, every room, every chair and curtain has a history, a rule book, a script. You don't sit where you want. You sit where you're placed. You don't speak how you feel. You speak how you're instructed. You're surrounded by architecture and furniture and floral arrangements, and none of them were designed to accommodate you as a full, living person. Because in Victorian weddings, the space does not support the couple. The couple supports the space. You are a structural beam of the illusion, and your back is already breaking. Let's say it plainly now. The environment of your Victorian wedding is not a backdrop. It is the entire performance. Every piece of furniture is a prop. Every hallway is a stage. Every room, a scene partner in your slow and beautiful unravelling. There is no neutral space. Nowhere to collapse, nowhere to scream. The house is grand, yes, but grand in the way a museum is grand. Large, echoing, and filled with beautiful things you are not allowed to touch. You move through it like a borrowed spirit, conscious of every squeaking floorboard, every dusty beam, every eye that might be watching from behind a curtain that hasn't been washed since the last family scandal. Your physical body becomes something to manage, to disguise, to dress and redress until it resembles a suitable vessel for tradition. Too tall? Wear shorter heels. Too short? Stand on the left side of every photograph. Too curvy? Corset? Too thin? Padding? And if none of that works, stand near ferns. They're flattering. They distract. Even your hands aren't yours anymore. They're presentation objects. They hold bouquets, accept gloves, sign documents that hand over your legal personhood. If you're the bride, your hands are constantly being touched, kissed by uncles, held by mothers, examined for rings, passed between men like a fragile letter of recommendation. You can't clench them. You can't tremble. You must always appear soft, calm, agreeable, like butter left out for just the right amount of time. Now think about the sounds, not the music, not the speeches, the everyday sounds of this wedding machine humming around you. There's the endless rustle of fabric, lace brushing over carpet, silk sleeves whispering against each other like they know something you don't. There's the clink of porcelain, always porcelain, because heaven forbid someone drink tea out of glass. There are footsteps, constant footsteps, the sharp, precise walk of a footman, the hesitant shuffle of a cousin trying not to intrude, the heavy, decisive tread of someone who owns the place and wants you to feel it. There are no soft noises in Victorian houses, only quiet ones. Quiet is not softness. Quiet is control. A room is silent, not because it's peaceful, but because it's waiting for you to mess up. You speak, and suddenly it's loud. You cough, and 10 chairs twitch in unison. You drop a spoon, and you may as well have fired a pistol. This is not comfort. This is the architecture of surveillance. Even the weather seems complicit. Let's say it rains. The kind of slow, miserable rain that stains boots and ruins curls. The house smells of damp wool and old ash. Everyone pretends this is romantic. A lucky sign, they say, as you wipe water from your face, like it's not slowly eroding the expression you spent 2 hours arranging. The windows fog over. The rooms become darker. Your veil clings to your arms like a web. No one comments, of course. They just stare politely while hoping you don't melt too obviously. If it's sunny, that's worse. The light reveals everything. The sweat along your neckline, the crack in your smile, the way your fiancé looks like he hasn't slept in 4 days. The guests fan themselves and talk about how unfortunate it is for the flowers, as if roses have a lower melting point than your dignity. But most often, it's just grey. A polite English grey. The sky looks like it's made of dishwater. And somehow, that feels appropriate. This wedding doesn't need sun. It thrives in overcast. A light that flattens everything, softens the edges, and turns the world into one long, draped sigh. Let's go back inside. There's a room you haven't seen yet, the morning room. A small, bright space meant for feminine leisure, sewing, light reading, tea. It smells like violets and old sugar. The wallpaper is floral, but faded. The chairs are too upright to be comfortable, and there's a sense that something important was said here once, but not by anyone living. This is where brides go to sit while things are finalised. You'll be asked to wait here. Your gloves will be laid out on the table. A cup of tea will be placed just slightly out of reach, so you must either stretch awkwardly or let it go cold. There is a book of etiquette open to a page you did not choose. It says something about maintaining feminine poise during periods of transition. You stare at it until the letters blur. This is the last room you'll be in before everything changes, and the house knows it. Let's now visit the servants' staircase, even though you shouldn't. You're not supposed to use it. It's narrow, steep, built for function, not grace. It smells like soap and boiled vegetables and the quiet resignation of people who know too much. This is the staircase they'll use to move your trunks, to carry down the wedding cake leftovers, to disappear your mistakes. It's the only honest thing in the house. Meanwhile, on the main staircase, the one you will walk down, preparations are underway. The banister has been polished, the steps have been swept. Someone's positioned the ushers to look casual but reverent. You will descend slowly, 1 foot at a time, like a sacrificial offering being brought to altar. People will watch. They will not speak. They will not smile. This is the moment they've come for. It is less a descent and more a symbolic fall. From person to bride. From self to symbol. Let's talk about the ceremony space. The room where you will say the words. It could be a church, a great echoing box of cold marble and colder expectations, or a drawing room converted hastily into a chapel. Either way, it's not a sacred place. It's a pressure cooker with stained glass. You stand before a minister who looks like he hasn't laughed since childhood, surrounded by people dressed like ghosts, speaking vows you did not write and barely understand. The air smells like starch and lilies. The candles flicker, not romantically, but like they're afraid. And here comes the part where you say "I do." You say it. You don't mean it. Not entirely. But that's fine. It's not a declaration of love. It's a contractual checkpoint. A socially verified soundbite that signals your transition into the role this house, this environment, has already chosen for you. And once it's said, the room changes. The house exhales. The guests relax. The environment reconfigures around you like a finished equation. You are now married, which means according to every object in this building, you are now done. You are placed in a carriage. You wave or you don't. You stare at the house as it fades into the distance, a silhouette of columns and curtains, already preparing for its next wedding. You think you'll miss it. You won't. You'll miss the idea of a home that saw you, heard you, held you. But this was never that. This was architecture, ceremony, and the faint, constant sound of a society rearranging the furniture of your identity. So the next time someone tells you Victorian weddings were elegant, beautiful, refined, maybe they were, but only on the surface. Peel back the brocade, and underneath you'll find a girl in shoes that don't fit, a man in a coat too tight to breathe, and a house so full of expectation it forgot how to make space for a soul. This wasn't just a building, it was a machine, and it ran on you. Let's be honest, Victorian marriage doesn't begin when the music stops. It begins the morning after, when your corset is still half undone, the house smells like dying flowers, and someone is already knocking with a list of social obligations longer than your new last name. This isn't a honeymoon. This is the first day of the longest job you'll ever hate to admit is a job. You wake up beside your spouse, or near them, depending on how many layers of lace, silence, and disappointment were between you last night. The bed is stiff. The room smells like last night's candles, and your mouth tastes like politeness. There is no sleeping in. That would be indulgent. You rise at 7, not because you want to, but because married people are expected to be productive, even when the only thing you've produced so far is a pile of sweaty linens and mild social anxiety. Your first official task? Breakfast, not eating it, managing it. The Victorian wife does not slouch down to the table in a robe and yawn into her tea. She organises the service. She ensures the eggs are boiled just long enough to avoid scandal. She critiques the toast, compliments the jam, and nods in tight approval when her husband mentions the price of coal. This is not a meal. This is performance management with marmalade. If you're the husband, your job has already begun too, in the abstract. Your existence is now a rotating cycle of financial stress, public appearances, and pretending to enjoy things like claret and fox hunting. You do not get to say you're tired. You do not get to cry. Your emotions are checked at the door with your umbrella and never seen again. You are the head of a household, which means you are expected to lead, provide, and know the price of barley at any given moment. After breakfast, the wife begins her real work. Not paid, of course. That would be unthinkable. This is unpaid, invisible, and expected. A Victorian wife is a CEO of domestic drudgery. She supervises the staff, reviews the menus, writes thank you notes, oversees wardrobe maintenance, monitors household expenses, keeps track of relatives' birthdays, and somehow also finds time to embroider monograms onto the handkerchiefs of people who actively dislike her. If you don't have staff, because you're middle class, or upper poor but aspirational, then congratulations. You do all this yourself. You become the staff. You cook. You scrub. You mend socks while balancing your respectability on a needlepoint cushion of lies. There is no weekend. There is no payday. There is only a faint nod of approval from your mother-in-law, which is the closest thing to compensation you'll ever see. Let's take a walk through the average wife's daily agenda. Morning. Oversee breakfast. Smile without showing teeth. Sign off on grocery list. Pretend to enjoy the smell of wet laundry. Receive a visit from a neighbour who wants to talk about the recent sermon. Nod enthusiastically while plotting your emotional escape. Midday. Attend to correspondence. Thank people for things you didn't want. Apologise for things you didn't do. Decline invitations you cannot afford. Read one sentence of a novel before remembering your soup needs checking. Curse the concept of soup. Afternoon. Review the household accounts. Realise you're out of lamp oil, flour, and the will to live. Fold linens. Refold linens because the first fold was inadequate. Visit your sister-in-law and pretend you care about her baby's new tooth. Return home just in time to catch the maid using the wrong spoon for dusting. Have a silent existential crisis in the pantry. Evening. Host dinner, or endure dinner, or smile through dinner while your husband discusses the superiority of British exports with a man whose handshake felt like being politely assaulted. Laugh at a joke about Prussians. Excuse yourself. Return to help extinguish the lamps. Get into bed. Lie still. Repeat. And this is the good version of marriage. If your husband is kind, you get polite neglect. If he's cruel, you get psychological warfare with a side of legal immunity. There is no recourse. You cannot divorce. You cannot leave. You cannot complain without being labelled nervous, emotional, or the dreaded difficult. And once labelled, your credibility evaporates like afternoon gin on a linen tablecloth. If you are poor, your daily struggle changes shape, but not intensity. Now your labour is physical too. You cook every meal. You carry every bucket. You wash clothes by hand using soap made of disappointment and regret. You wake before dawn to light the fires. You sleep after midnight because someone has to mend the curtain and patch the knees on your husband's only decent trousers. You do not write thank you notes. You write grocery lists on the backs of old envelopes and pray you can afford salt this week. There is no parlour here, no drawing room. Just one main room that smells like boiled cabbage and survival. The floor is always cold, the baby is always crying, your body is always aching. And yet you are expected to be cheerful, or at least quiet. God forbid you complain. That might give the neighbours something to gossip about. And your reputation is worth more than your sanity. For the working class husband, labour means actual labour. You leave the house before the sun, wearing boots that haven't been dry since Easter. You work in a factory, or on the docks, or in a mine, inhaling air thick with soot and disappointment. You come home exhausted, hungry, aching, and still expected to be the man of the house, whatever that means when the roof leaks and your dinner is mostly bread. You do not talk about your feelings. You do not ask for help. You do not question why everything feels like a race you didn't sign up for. You drink. You shout. You sit silently and hope the baby falls asleep before you lose your last scrap of patience. You envy your own child because at least someone feeds him without a fight. Let's not forget about pregnancy, because Victorian marriage is not just labour in the domestic sense, it's also reproductive labour. If you're the wife, you're expected to produce children, quietly, repeatedly, without complaint. Your body becomes a factory, operating under poor conditions with zero medical benefits. Prenatal care is mostly superstition. Childbirth is a gamble, a very public, very painful gamble. Your mother will say it's a woman's burden. The doctor will say be brave. The midwife will say push, and no one will say, "Are you okay?" Afterwards, you're handed a baby and expected to love it instantly, feed it constantly, and recover quietly. Your husband might pat your hand, or he might go back to reading the newspaper while wondering if you'll be up to hosting dinner next week. This is what labour looks like in a Victorian marriage: invisible, unending, and profoundly unrewarded. And if you do all of it, the breakfasts, the budgeting, the birthing, the smiling, the soup, if you somehow manage to complete your daily to-do list of impossible tasks without screaming into a china cabinet, what do you get? You get to do it again tomorrow. Let's go deeper. If marriage is a job, and in Victorian England it is, then think of the home not as a sanctuary, but a workplace with no exit door, no holidays, and no clear job description. One where the only feedback you get is whether or not your soup was the right temperature, and your children don't curse in public. For the Victorian wife, your day is not segmented into tasks. It's a single continuous motion. From dawn to dusk, you're expected to glide through the house with unflinching grace, the domestic equivalent of a swan paddling frantically beneath the surface while floating silently above. You do not hustle. Hustling is for tradesmen and horses. You manage. You supervise. You preside. All of these words sound dignified, but what they mean is that you're responsible for everything and cannot visibly struggle under the weight of it. There are servants, maybe, but servants don't run a household. You do. They follow orders, they notice your weaknesses, they talk about you while polishing the silver, they fold your underclothes with passive-aggressive precision. If something goes wrong, a dish overcooked, a table setting out of alignment, a guest left waiting, it's not the cook or the maid who is blamed. It's you. And you're supposed to be good at this, without training, without rest, without ever once acknowledging that maybe you weren't born to spend your prime years scheduling flour deliveries and monitoring cheese rot. There are no breaks. A Victorian wife doesn't clock out. If she gets sick, she suffers quietly and in corset. If she's overwhelmed, she faints. Fainting is the only sanctioned form of protest. It's crying with social permission. Anything stronger is hysteria, and hysteria means your cousin Lydia starts whispering that you've become delicate and recommends rest cures and colder bedrooms. Let's talk about social visits, the invisible labour that keeps this world spinning. Visiting others isn't leisure, it's reputation maintenance. You dress up. You call at precisely the right hour. You sit on the edge of chairs designed to punish bad posture and compliment wallpaper you secretly despise. The conversation is light, unchallenging, and utterly draining. You must express admiration without envy, humility without dullness, and curiosity without implying dissatisfaction with your own life. You do not speak freely. You deploy words like lace, decorative, non-threatening, slightly itchy. You bring calling cards, which are like Victorian business cards for people who don't have businesses. There is a correct weight, thickness, and font. There is a correct tray in which to place them upon entering someone's home. If you place your card incorrectly or hand it to the wrong servant, you might as well have kicked their cat. The social wound will fester. And that's just visiting people. Hosting them is worse. Hosting is the Olympics of domestic labour. You must clean the house, organise the meal, brief the servants, manage your husband's moods, and ensure everyone leaves believing you are elegant, successful, and not 5 minutes away from collapsing into the hydrangea arrangement. Hosting a dinner party requires weeks of planning and a full-body commitment to self-erasure. You're expected to orchestrate a night that looks effortless. That means no visible stress, no sweating, no moments of panic where the goose is underdone and the fire's gone out and your husband is asking where the good napkins are because he invited someone who once ate with a minor royal. You glide, you pour wine, you laugh at jokes you've heard 3 times this week. You excuse yourself discreetly when your stocking slips or your nerves fray. You ensure the seating arrangement is perfect, not socially awkward, not too radical, not too dull. This is chess, with linen. And then there's fashion, or what Victorians call presentation. You must dress well, but not too well. Your gown must be fashionable, but modest. Tailored, but not flamboyant. You must keep up with changing styles, sleeve shapes, hem lengths, fabric textures, without appearing vain. Every morning you assemble an outfit that says, "I'm attractive, but not trying to be." Your hair is not yours. It is a topiary sculpted to distract from the fact that you haven't had a full meal since Tuesday. If you're wealthy, you have a maid help you dress. This sounds like luxury. It isn't. It's theatre. You must act as though being laced into a corset so tight your lungs whisper apologies is normal. That being trussed up in whalebone and velvet for a walk around the rose garden is just part of being alive. And when you finally emerge, breathless but poised, everyone says you look refreshed. You're not. You're suffocating with dignity. Now let's examine emotional labour, the invisible web holding it all together. You must anticipate everyone's needs, your husband's moods, the children's whims, the guests' opinions. You must soften the sharp corners of social life, smooth over disagreements, pretend not to notice your father-in-law's political rants, laugh politely when someone tells a story about a servant who misunderstood the word scone. If there's tension in the room, it's your job to fix it. If someone feels uncomfortable, it's your job to comfort them. And if you feel anything, rage, grief, confusion, it is your job to swallow it in silence and digest it into compliments about the rhubarb tart. Let's be clear, none of this is acknowledged. You will never be thanked for it. No one will say, "Thank you for managing the emotional well-being of 8 people while wiping jam off a doily and feigning interest in stamp collecting." They will say, "You make it look so easy," which is Victorian for, "I'm glad I didn't have to do it." Meanwhile, your husband's labour is considered actual work. Even if he spends all day in an armchair reading the paper, the assumption is that he could go back to work at any moment. His leisure is earned. Yours is suspicious. Should you be seen reclining, people assume you're lazy, unwell, or indulging in French tendencies. Even conversation is labour. There are rules. You must know what's appropriate, what's too academic, what's too morbid, what's too feminist. There are banned topics: sex, money, feelings, anything too real. You talk about flowers, novels without conflict, the weather, other people's children, and how lovely the canapes were at Lady Merryweather's recent luncheon, even though you choked on one and briefly saw God. And if you fail, if you slip, if you raise your voice, forget your gloves, disagree with a guest, serve undercooked quail, speak your mind, or, heaven forbid, cry in public, the penalty is quiet and absolute. You are marked, not outwardly, not immediately, but marked, as difficult, as unstable, as someone to be pitied, avoided, or quietly corrected through fewer invitations and more unsolicited prayer. Because Victorian society doesn't need to punish you loudly. It simply forgets you on purpose. Let's talk about the honeymoon, not the trip. The word. The honeymoon, from honey and moon, implies a sweetness that fades, a brief, glowing illusion that disappears in the cold light of obligation. For the Victorians, it was often just that. A brief trip, more ceremonial than relaxing, designed not for intimacy, but for visibility. You went away, you were seen, you came back, married, changed, silent. Most newlyweds didn't even go alone. You brought a chaperone, or stayed at a relative's country house, or booked a suite in a seaside hotel where the staff knew not to look too closely, and the walls were thin enough for the maid to gossip for years afterward. There was no relaxation, no privacy, no chance to breathe. You dressed for dinner. You sent letters home. You made polite conversation with strangers who wanted to know how married life was treating you, as if it was a hat you'd just bought and might return next week. And then you came home. You stepped back into the house, your house, his house, their house, and everything had changed. You weren't a guest anymore. You were the lady of the house, the one who must now oversee every detail of every day with the efficiency of a factory foreman and the elegance of a fallen angel. You opened the door and were instantly handed responsibility like it was a teacup, delicate, brimful, and always at risk of spilling. This is where the real labour begins, because now you have no excuse. You're married, settled. Your youthful ignorance no longer buys you indulgence. You must know how to budget, entertain, discipline, decorate, correct, and obey. You're expected to operate at full efficiency, like a steam engine made of bone and velvet. No instruction manual, no off switch. You manage your husband's calendar, you monitor the servants, you oversee the linen rotation, you ensure the jam is boiled to precisely the correct consistency, and that no one in the neighbourhood suspects you've ever eaten a meal on your lap. If something goes wrong, the roast burns, the parlour wallpaper begins to peel, your child coughs in church, you must fix it, quietly and immediately. Victorian society does not tolerate visible error. If you fail, the failure is yours. If you succeed, the success is absorbed into the wallpaper. There's no such thing as a job well done, only a job done invisibly. Your husband works, of course. He has an office, a study, a leather chair that smells like old paper and misdirected ambition. He reads the Times. He writes letters. He visits his club. He discusses grain exports and imperial matters with men whose faces resemble boiled ham. His labour is respected, public, measurable. Yours is none of those things. You do the kind of work that vanishes the moment it's finished. You clean what should never be dirty. You prepare meals that disappear in silence. You soothe tempers, dress wounds, answer questions, nod on cue, and sleep with one eye open in case the baby cries, or the roof leaks, or your sister-in-law stops by unannounced to talk about her latest spiritual awakening. No one sees it, but it must be done, and you must never appear tired. Tiredness is a moral weakness. Fatigue is selfish. Exhaustion is simply what happens when you don't pray hard enough. So you press your knuckles into your lower back. You smile. You say you're fine. You are always fine. You could be bleeding out from a womb that's given up hope, but if someone asks how you're doing, you say just a little overbusy and change the subject to marmalade. Let's talk about parenting. In a Victorian household, child rearing is labour, not maternal bliss, not warm-hearted chaos. Labour. The kind that includes feeding, dressing, disciplining, and most importantly, not raising children who embarrass you in front of the bishop. There are rules, there are schedules, there are opinions from doctors, aunts, nannies, strangers at church. Everyone knows how you should raise your children. You just need to interpret the conflicting advice while juggling your husband's expectations, your mother-in-law's passive aggression, and a toddler who keeps putting beetles in the sugar bowl. You're not supposed to show frustration, or attachment, or ambition. You must love your children, but not so much that you forget your husband. You must educate them, but not so thoroughly that they become improper. You must discipline them, but never harshly. You must be their guide, their rock, their moral compass, while simultaneously organising dinner, wiping a nose, and hemming curtains by candlelight. And if something goes wrong, a tantrum, a cough, a poor showing at Sunday school, that's not a childhood event. That's a character indictment on you. And so you keep working through the noise, through the doubt, through the slow, creeping realization that the role you are assigned is not one you auditioned for, and yet you're expected to perform it flawlessly forever. The husband's labour, meanwhile, may also be grinding. He may work in trade, or law, or finance, but when he returns home, the house is his reward. He is greeted, served, poured, escorted to a meal that reflects not your culinary skill, but your moral fibre. A badly prepared chop means more than hunger. It means failure. And if he is not kind, if he is harsh, silent, unpredictable, then your labour expands. Now you must manage his moods too. Predict his outbursts. Navigate his silences. Absorb his dissatisfaction like a sponge wearing perfume. You must become a mood regulator, a buffer, a shield. And all while dressing well enough to not appear resentful. But even in a kind marriage, the struggle remains. Because kindness doesn't lessen the weight of expectation. It only softens the edges of duty. You must still perform. You must still fulfill. You must still appear composed, happy, grateful, even as your days collapse into endless repetition. Even as your body begins to stiffen from years of lifting, bending and carrying things, groceries, children, conversations, secrets. There's no applause, there are no promotions, there is no pension, only whispers, only aging, only the quiet hope that someone someday might say, "She did well." And if they do, it will not be in your lifetime, because Victorian women didn't get legacies. They got teacups with initials on them, and a few sentences in someone else's memoir. So you keep working, because to stop is to unravel. To stop is to see clearly what you've built your life around. And that kind of clarity isn't safe. Not here, not now, not when there are sheets to iron, guests to host, children to correct, husbands to please, and candles to extinguish before bed. So you do your final task of the day. You blow out the light. You climb into bed. You lie still. And tomorrow, when the sun barely rises through the lace-curtained window, you'll begin again. Welcome to your social ranking. You didn't choose it. You didn't earn it, but it owns you now. Victorian society runs on status the way your lungs run on air, constantly, invisibly, and with terrifying consequences when interrupted. Your marriage, this beautiful embroidered trap you've stepped into, doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists inside a hierarchy so complex it makes a beehive look like a food court. And unlike modern weddings where everyone pretends to be equal while drinking Prosecco out of mason jars, a Victorian wedding is a hyper-stratified display of human classification. Everything is a signal. The invitations, the menu, the guest list, the linens, all of it choreographed to establish not just who you are, but who you are not. Let's begin with the guest list. You've already spent weeks constructing it with the precision of a watchmaker and the stress levels of a bomb technician. Not because you love everyone on it, but because every name sends a message. You invite your second cousin Beatrice, not because she's charming, but because she married well and brings a certain weight to your side of the church. You invite Colonel Halberton because he once dined with a viscount, even though he thinks women shouldn't speak above a whisper. Every inclusion is a gamble. Every omission is an insult. If you invite the Lannings but not the Abernethys, someone's going to faint in a hallway. And heaven forbid you forget to send a card to someone who once loaned your father an umbrella during a rainstorm in 1842. That umbrella saved your entire future. Then there's the seating arrangement, the emotional battlefield of the Victorian wedding. This is not just about who sits where. This is about rank. Distance from the bride and groom is a measure of social proximity. If you're seated close, congratulations. You are valued. If you're placed near the pianoforte in the side room, enjoy your cabbage rolls with a side of subtle exclusion. And yes, people notice. They measure the inches between their plate and the head table like it's a barometer of their worth. Being seated next to a minor baronet is thrilling. Being seated next to a cousin with socialist ideas is social euthanasia. The tablecloths know this. The cutlery knows this. You are being evaluated by every inlaid fork. Let's talk wedding attire. If you are the bride, you're expected to wear white. Not because it's flattering, but because Queen Victoria did it first, and now everyone else has to suffer for it. But it's not just about the colour. It's about how white. Bright white shows wealth. Slightly yellowed lace implies budget conscious. A splash of ivory, risky. Someone will whisper that you're not quite pure, even if you've never been alone with a man, or even made eye contact for more than 4 seconds. Your gown must be beautiful, but not too fashionable. You don't want to look vain. You don't want to look poor. You want to look like someone whose father can afford 10 servants, but still kneels at the family pew every Sunday. The train must be long enough to signal virtue, but short enough to avoid tripping a bishop. And that veil, it doesn't just hide your face, it hides your class anxiety. It says, look at me, but not too closely. If you're a guest, the dress code is its own nightmare. Upper-class ladies wear pastel silk. Middle-class women wear retailored gowns from last season, praying no one notices the hem has been let out. Servants wear uniforms, stand against the walls, and silently judge everyone with the quiet confidence of people who know where the real mess is hidden. Men have it easier. They wear suits, morning coats, gloves, cravats tied like they're concealing bad decisions. But even here, there are layers. The quality of the wool, the shine of the shoe, the straightness of the top hat. All of it categorized, catalogued, commented on. Weddings are not equal opportunity events. They are pageants of place. And don't even think about bringing a date who doesn't belong. If your escort is too loud, too tan, too educated in the wrong subjects, too curious about the existence of working class people, they will be treated like a flea in the lace. Which brings us to the next frontier of humiliation, the gift table. Victorian wedding gifts are not meant to be useful. They are meant to be admired, displayed, and occasionally stolen by relatives. A tea set is fine. A book of poetry is acceptable if it's by the right poet. A pair of gloves? Chic, practical, reserved. A second pair of gloves? Scandalous. What are you implying? That she'll go outside? If someone gives you hand-stitched linens, it means they love you. If they give you pewter candlesticks, it means they feel guilty. If they give you nothing, it means they are richer than you and want you to know it. And there's always one guest who gives a gift that's just a little too nice. A porcelain figurine from France, or a set of pearl-handled knives. This is a power play. It says, I know you'll never be able to return the favour. You're welcome. You smile. You say thank you. You die inside. Next is the church seating. Yet another test in Victorian class theatre. The bride's family sits on the left, the groom's on the right. But that's just the beginning. Within each side, there are further divisions. Elders at the front, important cousins just behind, friends of the family somewhere in the middle, slightly suspicious acquaintances in the back row praying the ceremony runs long enough to justify the train fare. If you are poor, you stand in the back, sometimes outside. You lean in through the open door, listening to vows not meant for you, watching dresses you could never afford, inhaling the scent of flowers that will be discarded by nightfall. There are no programmes printed with your name. There are no cushions waiting for you in the pew. You are here as a form of background ambience, like the clinking of glasses, or the nervous laugh of the groom's younger brother, who's been drinking since breakfast. And if you dare attend while visibly other, the wrong race, the wrong religion, the wrong accent, then every eye will follow you like a judgmental lighthouse. You will be seen, not included, just observed. Even the wedding breakfast is layered in class cruelty. It's not breakfast, it's a post-ceremony feast. And it's where all the worst behaviours bloom. There are toasts that go on too long. There are speeches that ignore half the room. There are dishes no one understands, presented in ways that make chewing feel transgressive. Every course is a conversation starter, or a social trap. The fish smells faintly of status. The sauces whisper about your upbringing. The cake is tall enough to block conversation between people who are secretly grateful they don't have to speak. And hovering over it all, the constant hum of social arithmetic. Who talked to whom? Who left early? Who asked for seconds? Who didn't eat at all? Who cried? Who looked too smug? Who spilled wine? Who brought up politics? Who wore the wrong gloves? Who clapped too long? Who clapped not at all? Because in a Victorian wedding, you are the entertainment. Not your love story, not your joy, you. You are a stage play of status. And whether you like it or not, you're centre stage. Let's be clear. A Victorian wedding isn't about love. It's about position, rank. A never-ending ballet of deference, proximity, and knowing who is just above or just below you in the invisible pyramid that governs everything from whose name is on the invitation to who gets the first slice of wedding cake. Let's talk about the families. Marriage isn't between two people. It's between two estates, two bloodlines, two clashing interpretations of what is and isn't acceptable in a butter dish. If your family is wealthier than your fiancé's, that gives you power, but not too much power. You don't want to look like you're buying a husband. If your family is less wealthy, then you'd better bring something else to the table. Social grace, a famous uncle, or at the very least, a story about being descended from someone who almost met Lord Byron once. And heaven help you if there's a scandal in your bloodline. A cousin who married a playwright, a sister who spoke at a public meeting, a grandfather who once expressed sympathy for the Irish. This will not be forgotten. It will be whispered about in dressing rooms, muttered about over tea, and factored into seating arrangements. You are not marrying into a person. You are marrying into a family archive. Now step into the reception line. This is where you, the newlyweds, stand side by side like artifacts in a museum, while every guest walks past and performs a very quiet ranking ritual. They shake your hand, offer their congratulations, and decide how much more or less they now respect you based on your scent, eye contact, and firmness of grip. You, in return, must remember their names, their titles, their allergies, whether they're from the East Riding or the West, whether they prefer marmalade to jam, whether they're the good type of cousin or the kind that gets invited out of obligation and budgeted for in teaspoons. This line is long, it is hot, it is exhausting, and it is absolutely essential. Because the Victorians don't care how much you love each other. They care whether you remember that Mr. Ludgrove's daughter married into the Norbury line in 1849, and that this union technically makes her your third cousin-in-law. If you don't remember, it's seen not as forgetfulness, but arrogance. Every person you greet is a possible critic. Every smile is scored. You don't get feedback. You get future consequences. Fewer invitations. Colder glances. A sudden lack of plum preserves at Christmas. This is how Victorian social control works. Not with punishments, but with withdrawal. Let's examine your dowry, the ultimate form of marital branding. Your dowry is your price tag. It's not a gift, it's a transaction. A Victorian man doesn't just marry a woman, he marries her financial weight, her income, her future property, her inherited silver, her theoretical future, children and their hypothetical success in university. If the dowry is small, you're marrying for love, which is sweet, and socially ruinous. If the dowry is generous, your new husband is expected to remain forever grateful, or at least forever polite. Everyone knows the number. No one says it out loud, but it's there, humming in the background of every conversation, like a mosquito or a guilty conscience. And if you're marrying without a dowry, you're a cautionary tale, a social experiment, a conversation starter for the bored and the petty. You must compensate with charm, fertility, or a truly remarkable ability to fold napkins into the shape of swans. And if you're the husband accepting a low dowry bride, you better be bringing something else to the table. Land, title, military service, a promising inheritance, or at the very least, exceptional hair. Even the servants participate in this hierarchy. Yes, the people bringing the food, cleaning the boots, dusting the baseboards, they're watching you, judging you. Not because they're cruel, but because they're the only ones who actually know what's going on. They see the mismatched napkins. They know the fish fork is missing. They can tell that your father's new waistcoat is 1 season behind, and that the champagne is only labelled French. They speak in glances, in smirks, in the way they refill your glass just a little too quickly when they sense you're uncomfortable. You are a performance, and they are the only audience that sees the seams. They know who really runs the house, who really paid for the flowers, who whispered what in which corner. And while they don't say a word during the reception, they'll talk about it in the kitchen long after the guests are gone and the candles are snuffed. Your social worth is being tallied, not just by nobles and dowagers, but by every person in that building who knows how to fold a napkin and carry 3 plates without looking down. Now let's move to post-wedding calls. You thought it was over. You thought you could rest. You were wrong. The wedding might be finished, but the grading continues. Over the next few weeks, people will come to visit you, not to wish you well, not to drop off forgotten gloves, but to measure how well you've settled into your role. They will observe your parlour, your posture, your choice of afternoon biscuit. They will assess your curtains, your vases, your tea set, your carpet. They will ask questions that sound benign, but are designed to test your boundaries. How are you finding married life? Translation: have you realised what you've done? Isn't it lovely to have your own household? Translation: do you understand how far above your station this all is? Have you any news? Translation: are you pregnant yet? You must answer every question like it's been approved by a panel of duchesses. Smiling, neutral, grateful. The hierarchy doesn't end when the guests leave. It's just quieter, colder, more permanent. Let's talk titles. If you marry up into a title, everything changes. You're now addressed differently. Mrs. becomes lady. Your initials become shorthand for everyone else's insecurity. But the price is steep. Now you're not just expected to be elegant. You're expected to embody an institution. You're a symbol, not a spouse. And the people beneath you? They'll never forget that you weren't always titled. That once you stood in the back row at someone else's wedding with a borrowed hat and a prayer for better seating next time. And if you marry down? Oh, people won't say it, but they'll never stop showing it. You'll feel it at dinner, in the way people offer you water, but not wine, in the way your name gets left off the committee list, in the way someone introduces you as Dear Edith. She married a charming fellow who works in finance, was it? Which is Victorian for, we don't know him. And that bothers us. Your marriage is a resume, and everyone you meet is an unpaid recruiter deciding whether or not you qualify for basic human warmth. And you can never correct them. That's the cruelest part. You can't say, actually, we're quite happy. You can't say, he treated me well. You can't say, we're not rich, but we laugh. Because none of that matters. Not here. Not to them. Now let's visit the concept of reputation, Victorian society's unofficial currency, blood sport, and method of population control. Reputation is everything. More permanent than love. More fragile than crystal. It determines where you sit, who you marry, who greets you on the street, and, most importantly, who pretends not to see you when you walk into the room. And a wedding is the single most reputation-exposing event in your life. It doesn't build your status. It reveals it. Like lifting a silver dome off a roast and finding out whether it's beef or a collection of someone else's mistakes in gravy. The rumours begin before the ceremony. They come in little waves. Speculative. Sweetly phrased. Terrifying in their casual precision. She seems quite nice. She's quite pretty. She's a little young. She's a little not young. She's been abroad, you know. She's rather fond of novels. She's not the first girl he courted. Each phrase sounds harmless, even complimentary. None of them are. These are whispers dipped in arsenic, and designed to be deniable but unforgettable. Once said, they linger. They stain the lace. They echo off the wainscoting. And the worst part? You can't stop them. You can't fight a whisper. You can't win a rumour war. If you protest, you're defensive. If you ignore it, you're hiding something. If you cry, you're emotional. If you laugh, you're cold. So you do what every Victorian bride is taught to do. You smile, you sit, you fold your hands and try to outlast the narrative. Meanwhile, your husband's reputation has its own gravitational pull. If he's well-liked, successful, charming, then you are assumed to be lucky. If he's stoic, cold, withdrawn, then you are expected to inspire him, fix him, absorb him like bad lighting. If he's known for debts, drinking, or women who arrive unannounced, then you must counterbalance him with grace, so relentless it could soften iron. You are not your own person. You are his public relations strategy. Let's visit the realm of humiliation, now that we're comfortable. Victorian humiliation is not loud, it is not crude, it is not theatrical. It is soft, it is elegant. It is sharpened to a point so fine you don't even feel the wound until someone else is already laughing at it. Maybe it's a misplaced compliment. You're looking so comfortable. Maybe it's a pointed omission. Of course I didn't include you in the letter. I assumed you were far too busy. Maybe it's a gift that isn't quite appropriate. A cookery book, even though your household already employs a chef. A bonnet that's just slightly out of fashion. A small bottle of lavender water with a note that simply reads, "Thought you might need this." These are social knives. You don't bleed, you wilt. Sometimes it's your mother-in-law. I've always admired how little Edith says in public. It's so restful. Sometimes it's your father. We never expected her to marry someone with connections. Sometimes it's your friends. She's doing the best she can. And every time it happens, you smile. You say thank you. You offer tea. You do not cry. At least not here. That's what the cloakroom is for. Let's not forget letters. In a world without text messages or gossip podcasts, the written word is a battlefield. Letters arrive after the wedding, ostensibly to offer congratulations, but also to pass judgment. You'll receive a note from Lady Brighton, scrawled in lilac ink, praising your choice of lilies, but quietly lamenting the unorthodox placement of the musicians. You'll get one from Aunt Agnes, who mentions that she's praying for your strength and discipline, which is Victorian for "I hope you don't ruin this like everything else." Even silence is a letter. Someone who should have written but didn't. That's its own kind of statement. A blank envelope that says, "You're no longer useful." Or worse, "You never were." Let's shift to post-wedding society. Now that you're married, you're fair game. You'll be invited places. Not because they like you, but because they need to see if you're going to be a problem. You're paraded through dinner parties, garden walks, charity events, and afternoon teas like a new piece of furniture someone's not quite sure about. And every one of those events is a test. Do you know when to speak and when to nod? Do you know the proper distance to maintain when curtsying to someone whose title outranks yours, but whose morals don't? Can you arrange flowers without implying ambition? Can you mention your trip to Bath without sounding like you're bragging? Failure is not punished. Failure is remembered, and if you succeed, you disappear into acceptability. Because in Victorian society, success means being unremarkable. Remarkability is dangerous. It threatens the order. You're meant to blend, to match, to echo. You're meant to become another decorative pillar holding up the illusion of civility. And what if, God help you, your marriage begins to struggle, not explode, just fray, subtly, silently. You're not speaking as often. The meals are quieter. The letters have slowed. The air feels brittle. Do you tell anyone? Of course not. No one wants the truth. They want the narrative, the idea of you, the promise of your union. You're not allowed to be unhappy. You're allowed to be fatigued, busy, in transition. You smile through dinners. You sip through tension. You speak fondly of a man you barely recognise anymore. And you do it all in a house where even the wallpaper has an opinion. Because failure, even quiet failure, is contagious. And if people smell it on you, they'll step away, slowly, politely, completely. This is the real hierarchy, not just of wealth or bloodline or fame, but of perceived security. Those who appear content rise. Those who seem unstable, even just for a moment, drop. And no one catches them. Because to reach down is to risk being pulled with them. So you learn to float on manners, on posture, on empty words said with a full smile. You become fluent in survival by performance. You walk through your life like a statue on wheels, moved, polished, never fully awake, never fully safe. This is the hidden labour, the unspoken game, the humiliating truth. You will never be enough for all of them, but you must pretend you are, because pretending is the only thing holding this pyramid together. Let's begin with something obvious but terrifying. In the Victorian era, marriage was not private, it wasn't sacred, it wasn't personal. It was a public rite of passage, a civic obligation, and a spiritual performance, all happening in a fishbowl with floral trim. It was less about love and more about alignment, with values, with expectations, with a worldview where the church and dinner table shared the same core belief. You are being watched, not just by people, but by God, by society, by tradition, by every single dead relative whose portrait hangs in the hallway, eyes fixed forward like they can still see what you're doing with the linen budget. This is not metaphorical. Victorian culture was obsessed with observation. Manners were not just etiquette, they were theology. You didn't just behave, you believed in behaviour. You performed virtue not to feel righteous, but to be seen as righteous. And once you were married, this performance only intensified. Now, you weren't just a young lady or gentleman. You were part of the sacred institution, the contract, the moral edifice. You had a role to play, and every mirror in the house was a reminder to stay in character. Let's start with religion. Marriage was a religious institution, not just because it involved a priest, but because it was seen as the final act of spiritual alignment. A godly household wasn't just a pious one, it was a structured one. Husband above wife, wife above children, children above pets, pets above servants, servants above, well, no one. To marry was to step into this hierarchy, to affirm it, to uphold it with every table setting and bedtime prayer. Wives were expected to obey, not because men were inherently wise, but because the Bible said so, and because obedience was the feminine form of salvation. You didn't speak too loudly, not because it was rude, but because it was unholy. You didn't contradict your husband because it was ungodly. You didn't prioritize your own happiness because that was vanity. And vanity was sin. And sin, well, sin meant consequences, not always in the afterlife, but in the community. Social damnation came much faster than eternal fire. Let's visit the drawing room. This is not a neutral space. This is a shrine to virtue, to purity, to modesty. The furniture is arranged to discourage intimacy. The books are carefully selected to discourage thought. The portraits on the wall do not smile. They judge. Even the wallpaper is instructional, repetitive, orderly. morally consistent. In this space, the wife is not just a person. She is a priestess of social decorum. She must oversee the behaviour of others, correct it when necessary, never too harshly, never too soon, but always with the invisible baton of cultural control. If a guest tells an off-colour joke, she smiles vaguely. If someone swears, she coughs softly. If her husband becomes too animated while discussing politics, she gently places a hand on his arm and offers him another biscuit. The biscuit is not food, it is discipline. Now let's examine belief in roles. Everyone had one, and the strength of Victorian society depended entirely on no one trying to switch. The wife's role was submission, not passive, not weak, just self-contained. She didn't command, she influenced. She didn't object, she redirected. She didn't complain. She became ill in tasteful ways. Fatigue, nerves, a mysterious cough that didn't require treatment, just silence and fewer visitors. This wasn't repression. This was moral superiority disguised as fragility. To suffer was to sanctify. A woman's virtue wasn't measured by her pleasure. It was measured by her restraint. How little she ate. How slowly she walked. How softly she wept. If you could move through the world like a poem someone whispered but never wrote down, you were ideal. Husbands were expected to be stoic, rational, distant but reliable. Emotion was not forbidden. It was simply confined, allowed only in war, sports, or rare speeches at funerals. A man who cried in public without a uniform on was seen as defective. A man who laughed too freely was suspected of being French. The roles were not optional, they were moral obligations. The culture didn't just ask you to conform, it insisted that your soul depended on it. Let's talk about decorum as ideology. The Victorian belief system was so thoroughly woven into daily life that people stopped seeing it as constructed. It just was. The way gravity is, you didn't challenge it, you didn't even name it, you simply followed it. You were taught that certain things were unthinkable. Speaking first to a man, leaving your gloves off indoors, laughing too loudly, asking for what you need, saying no to your aunt, wanting time alone. These weren't just social mistakes, they were cultural betrayals. Even the way you sat was moralised, back straight, ankles crossed, hands folded in your lap, not just for posture, but for purity. You weren't relaxed, you were disciplined, you weren't comfortable, you were good. Let's go deeper. Every object in a Victorian home was a sermon. The piano, morally enriching. The bookshelf, proof of refinement. The curtains, a sign you understood privacy, which was code for self-restraint. Even the spoon you stirred your tea with said something about your character. Sterling, tasteful, silver-plated, trying too hard. Pewter, a cry for help. Victorian culture was so obsessed with appearances that appearances became culture. A house wasn't judged by how warm it felt, but how cold it made others feel. The more intimidating your parlour, the more virtuous your reputation. The more rigid your table settings, the more righteous your marriage. Even the act of being in love had to be filtered through cultural expectation. Too much affection, unseemly. Too little, suspicious. Touching hands in public, acceptable only if someone is fainting or dying. Kissing, reserved for novels, and even then, the tasteful kind. And yet, belief didn't stop at behaviour. Let's now explore shame, Victorian culture's favourite seasoning. Shame was not private, it was theatrical, public, strategic. It was how society reminded you of your limits. If you stepped outside your role, you weren't corrected. You were observed. Silently. Intensely. Until you corrected yourself. This was more effective than any punishment, because the fear of being watched was far more powerful than the act of being punished. It wasn't just religious. It was structural. Built into everything. Into the design of homes. Into the layout of cities. Into the weekly schedule, the lace, the hymn book, the timing of your walk in the park. The culture wasn't trying to suppress you. It was trying to shape you into someone predictable, contained, quiet, useful, a vessel for belief, a symbol of virtue, a ghost of desire, and marriage. Marriage was the gateway. The rite of passage where you handed over your autonomy and received in return a title, a house, a role, and an unspoken agreement. You will be watched. But if you do everything right, if you smile, host, cook, birth, nod, write, kneel, and die in the correct order, they'll let you be remembered. As a good wife, maybe even a great one, but never as yourself. Welcome back to your quiet little nightmare. Let's talk about ritual. Not just the wedding ceremony, but the afterlife of it, the endless procession of small sacred acts that structure Victorian life like a cathedral made out of habits. You don't just wake up, you rise. You don't just get dressed, you prepare yourself. You don't just serve tea, you perform hospitality. Everything is a rite, and marriage. Marriage is the most elaborate one of all. After the vows, you don't go home. You go deeper, into a structured daily theology where every fork placement is part of your moral resume. The order of service now includes breakfast schedules, calling hours, napkin folds, family devotions, embroidery patterns, servant discipline, and the public performance of inner peace. Let's begin at the beginning of the day. You wake in a marriage bed, a piece of furniture that is both symbolic and extremely uncomfortable. If you're rich, it's carved and monogrammed and slightly too stiff, like sleeping on an inherited family name. If you're poor, it's small, uneven, and slightly too warm from proximity and shared breath. Either way, you don't just roll out of it. You rise like a figure in an allegory. You're not groggy. You are graceful, or pretending to be. You start the day by dressing, not to be warm or decent, but to be appropriate. You must wear the right bodice, with the right number of buttons, at the right tightness, laced by someone who knows the difference between respectable compression and the kind that makes your spleen surrender. Your outer appearance must reflect your inner discipline. If your corset is too loose, you might as well be a revolutionary. If it's too tight, you're clearly vain. There is a window of moral acceptability about 2 inches wide, and your ribs are the cost of entry. From there, it's a full-day rehearsal of dignity. There are greetings to rehearse, smiles to maintain, hands to keep folded, coughs to muffle, opinions to repress, and feelings to discipline into the proper posture. You don't laugh so much as acknowledge amusement. You don't cry so much as recline due to nerves. You don't want anything. You prefer. You don't reject ideas. You withhold judgment. You are a creature of cultured restraint. And if for 1 second you slip, if you forget and reach for the jam before your husband has served himself, if you raise your voice while telling a story, if you admit that something hurt, you've broken the ritual. And the consequences are swift, not loud, but swift. A raised eyebrow, a redirected topic, a sudden silence over the tea, a gentle recommendation that you rest. Because rest is the Victorian prescription for women who say what they mean. Let's examine household religion. No, not prayer. Though that too in measured, audible, decorous quantities. Household religion is belief in structure, in hierarchy, in performance. The home itself is a temple, and you are both worshipper and altar. The arrangement of your sitting room reflects your understanding of God's order. The harmony of your dinner reflects your husband's leadership. The cleanliness of your children reflects your own spiritual success. A scuffed boot, a spiritual flaw, a missed appointment, a moral lapse, a child who fidgets in church, a symptom of your domestic sin. Because in Victorian society, order is holiness. Clean windows mean a clean conscience. Straight-backed chairs mean moral fibre. A creased tablecloth is an omen. You're not just a wife. You are the liturgy of the home. Let's step now into charity, Victorian style. You may be allowed, encouraged even, to serve the poor, but not to understand them. Pity is permitted. Solidarity is not. You can donate to the local orphanage. You can host a charity luncheon. You can knit tiny socks for the illegitimate offspring of scandalous barmaids. But you may not question the system that keeps them poor. Your marriage is part of that system. Your status depends on it. Your social value is measured in part by how graciously you help those beneath you, while never once considering that the entire staircase is crooked. And you do it all publicly. Your generosity is not private, it's observed. Every coin dropped into a collection box echoes back through the halls of reputation. If you give too little, you're selfish. If you give too much, you're performative. The sweet spot, like everything in this world, is invisible, painful, and enforced by gossip. Let's look at belief in suffering. This one's crucial, because Victorian culture didn't just accept suffering, it venerated it. To suffer quietly was seen as noble, holy, proof that you were good enough to endure hardship without bitterness. This wasn't masochism, it was theology. A good wife is not happy. She is grateful. A good wife does not complain. She offers it up. A good wife does not resist. She endures. And the more she endures, the more she is praised, especially after she dies. Pain in this worldview is not a sign that something's wrong. It's a sign that something is being perfected. You don't flinch at discomfort. You don't question exhaustion. You don't ask why the work never ends, why the joy never quite arrives, why the prayers go unanswered. You keep working. You keep smiling. You keep bowing your head at dinner and whispering thanks for whatever it is you're still doing here. And the cruelest part, you believe it. Because that's what belief is. Not agreement. Absorption. It becomes your reflex, your second language. The way your mouth forms thank you before your brain has finished screaming. The way you say I'm fine while your hands shake from holding everything up. The way you dream about silence, but wake up ready to serve. This is not religious faith. This is cultural theology. You've internalized the rules so deeply that breaking them would feel like falling out of the world. Let's finish with decorum as emotional censorship. In a Victorian marriage, emotions are filtered through protocol. You don't just feel something, you translate it. Sad? Call it tired. Angry? Call it disappointed. Lonely? Call it preoccupied. Happy? Keep it quiet. Too much joy looks unhinged. Or worse, French. There's no unfiltered moment. No loud laughter. No sobbing in the hallway. No passionate declaration of boredom, confusion, or heartbreak. There is only the performance of okayness. And the better you are at it, the fewer people ever ask if you need help. Which means that the most obedient women are often the most invisible. The most devout marriages are often the most silent. The most proper lives are the ones built entirely on rehearsed emotion. It's not that you don't feel. It's that no one wants to know about it, unless you can describe it in calligraphy. We begin here, not with a rule, but with a feeling. The feeling of being watched, not just by others, but by your own conscience, sculpted by years of gentle correction and velvet punishment. It's the soft internal voice that whispers, "Sit up straighter, don't speak so fast, watch your tone, hide your opinion, remember your station." It isn't God, it isn't your husband, it's you, after culture has worked its way in like damp behind wallpaper, and it never leaves. This is the final form of Victorian belief, when the cage becomes so beautiful, so respectable, so virtuous, that you forget it has bars at all. Let's talk about artificial sanctity. The home, the dress, the table, all arranged to look pure. But purity here isn't spiritual, it's decorative. White curtains, polished surfaces, pale cheeks, lace gloves, unwrinkled linen. Virtue has become aestheticized. The appearance of moral calm is more important than inner truth. You may be burning inside, but the roast is perfect, the silver is shining, and your smile is as still as the portrait above the fireplace. In this world, what you look like is always more important than what you are. You do not need to be kind. You need to appear not cruel. You do not need to be wise. You need to quote scripture when flustered. You do not need to love. You need to host without offence. You do not need to believe in God. You need to fold your hands the right way in church. This is not faith. This is behavioural taxidermy. And you, freshly married and fully enrolled in the doctrine of perfection, are expected to perform this spiritual theatre every single day. Let's visit the parlour bookshelf, your curated collection of safe ideas. There are books you must display, moral tales, history volumes, sanitised poetry. Nothing too philosophical, nothing controversial, nothing foreign unless translated and depoliticised. Books are not for challenge, they are for signalling, for showing that your home is orderly, refined, and allergic to original thought. Your marriage is not intellectual, it is compliant. Thought, if it happens at all, happens in private, in letters, in diaries, in cautious glances across dinner tables when someone accidentally says something true. But in public, thought is ornamental. It exists to flatter the status quo. And the status quo is hungry. Hungry for your self-erasure. Because to belong in this world, you must become something softer, quieter, less vivid. Like a painting that has been left in the sun too long. It starts with speech. You avoid words with edges. You say perhaps instead of no. You say how interesting instead of you're wrong. You say thank you when someone corrects you for something you already knew. Then it moves to movement. You stop gesturing. You stop standing too tall. You avoid walking too quickly. It looks masculine. You avoid standing too still. It looks aggressive. You practice gliding. Walking like fog. Present but ungraspable. Eventually, it reaches your identity. You stop asking yourself what you like, what you believe, what you dream about, because the answers are dangerous. They might not fit on the guest list. They might not match the sofa. They might not suit your husband's career. And so you reshape. You sand down the contradictions. You smooth out the oddness. You learn to blend into parties, into parlours, into silence. This is called maturity. This is called grace. This is called being a good wife. Let's now consider spiritual silence. Victorian marriage was full of prayer, but it was not for questioning. You didn't pray for clarity. You prayed for acceptance. You didn't ask, why me? You asked, how can I be better? If your husband strayed, you prayed harder. If your child grew sick, you thanked God it wasn't worse. If you cried at night, you offered it up for the redemption of someone else. If you felt joy, you whispered it quietly, lest it invite attention or consequence. The religion of marriage was not one of revelation. It was one of resignation, of letting go, of nodding politely while your soul unstitched itself beneath your corset. Because the deeper truth was this: you weren't allowed to want, not publicly, not obviously, not unless what you wanted was another helping of pudding or a new parasol in this season's beige. Wanting was disruptive. It broke the illusion. It made you visible in a world that only respects women when they are partly translucent. Even ambition had to be domesticated. If you wanted to influence anything, you did it through your husband, your children, your decor. You hoped that the way you folded a napkin might indirectly save a soul. Let's close with a walk through your final sanctuary, the bedroom, the most private room, the most heavily guarded space, and still not really yours. You decorate it modestly. No bold colours, no challenging art, nothing that suggests heat, imagination, or a personality too large to be housed in lace. Even your nightgown is symbolic. Soft, clean, asexual. You undress in silence by candlelight in the shadow of obligation. You do not sigh, you do not demand, you do not confess. You climb into bed beside your husband, or not, depending on the arrangements. You fold your hands. You stare at the ceiling. You think about tomorrow's menu. You wonder if you'll be able to find the right ribbon for the new drapes. You're not asleep, but you pretend. Because pretending is what got you this far. And outside, the night goes on. The candles die. The clocks tick. The house breathes. And somewhere deep inside that beautiful, godly, proper Victorian home, a woman is disappearing on schedule. You've made it through the ceremony. You've made it through the reception. You've nodded and smiled and curtsied your way through 14 hours of social theatre. Now finally you're left alone. And now the horror begins. Victorian marriage was built on two pillars, appearances and dread. So when the door closes, when the servants withdraw, and the fire dims and you are left in that carefully prepared bridal chamber, there's a moment, a pause, a breath, then panic. Let's talk about the wedding night. The phrase sounds romantic, gentle, cinematic, but in Victorian reality, it was closer to a supernatural haunting. Everyone knows it's coming. No one prepares you for it. There's no education, no conversation, no consent checklist. Only vague advice from a blushing aunt and one overheard story about a girl who screamed and fainted and still hasn't been invited back to her cousin's estate. If you are a bride, you are expected to be ignorant, blissfully so. In fact, your reputation depends on it. Knowing too much is suspect. Knowing anything is damning. The ideal Victorian bride is pure in mind and body, which means that her first sexual experience is expected to be a combination of religious surrender and physical confusion. And pain. Yes, that's part of it too. You're told to bear it quietly, with grace. You're not to flinch, not to cry. If it hurts, and it often does, you are to interpret it as a sacred sacrifice, an offering on the altar of marital destiny, something your mother went through, something your daughters will go through, a rite that must never be named. Let's say instead that it went well, that it was by some miracle tolerable, even pleasant. You can't say that either. Too much enjoyment suggests depravity or French ancestry. You're expected to float through the next morning glowing, not from desire, but from moral victory. Your husband, meanwhile, may be congratulated, nodded at, poured an extra brandy. You are poured tea, and then watched for signs, a flushed cheek, a limp, a refusal to sit for too long. All of it catalogued by your mother-in-law and recorded in the unspoken family ledger under status complete. Let's move on to fertility panic. From the moment you are married, your body is no longer yours. It is a vessel, a factory, a test. Every missed period is a prophecy. Every craving, a clue. Every sigh, every yawn, every bout of indigestion, a possible miracle or failure. And everyone is watching, not openly, not crudely, but with relentless subtlety. You look pale, dear. Your appetite's changed. You've been quiet lately. These are not observations. These are investigations. And if months pass and nothing happens, the questions begin. Have you seen Dr. Caldecott? Are you taking your salts? Have you considered a sea air retreat? As if your womb were merely a fussy guest in need of fresh scenery. And then the blame, always whispered, never direct, but always clear. She's too cold. She reads too much. She never takes her gloves off at dinner. She walks too fast. She walks too slow. She knits left-handed. She cursed herself by wearing pearl earrings on her wedding day. She once laughed at a joke that wasn't biblical. Meanwhile, the husband is never questioned. He is above suspicion. His virility is a given. His bloodline is untouchable. If no child arrives, the only logical explanation, obviously, is that the woman is somehow defective. Even the superstitions agree. Let's catalogue a few, shall we? It's bad luck for a bride to see herself in the mirror in her full wedding outfit before the ceremony, unless she removes one shoe. If the groom drops the wedding ring, it means death within the year, but only if it rolls left. If a cat sneezes near the bride on the morning of her wedding, she will have a happy life, unless it's a black cat, in which case she's cursed. Rain is a good omen, unless there's thunder. Then it means the couple will argue. If the bride stitches her own dress, she will cry for every stitch. Every step of this ritual is laced with anxiety, folklore, and the quiet certainty that you are always one lace-trimmed mistake away from doom. Let's shift to bodily horror. Victorian medicine, as a whole, was more dramatic than effective. Treatments for female ailments ranged from try smelling salts to let's remove something you might not need. Childbirth? Brutal. Often fatal. No anaesthesia until late in the era, and even then controversial. Many believed that pain in childbirth was a divine punishment for Eve's sins, and therefore relief from it was morally suspect. If you were lucky, your doctor was kind. If you were less lucky, he was interested in experimentation. If you were poor, your midwife might use herbs and prayer. If you were unlucky, well, you were buried quietly, and the baby was handed to the wet nurse. Even pregnancy itself was treated like a polite horror. It was not discussed in public. A lady did not speak of her condition. She simply withdrew, retired, began to take rest for several months while her friends speculated on the sex of the child based on the shape of her ankles. And if the child died, as many did, you were expected to mourn, but not grieve. Grief was private, silent, decorated in black crepe and hidden behind lowered lashes. And God help you, if it happened more than once, you were now unfortunate. A woman whose name became synonymous with tragedy, invited out of pity, whispered about at church, avoided by expectant mothers in case misfortune was contagious. Let's take a brief stroll through the world of domestic madness. Because yes, of course, there's a room for that too. If a married woman began to break down, emotionally, mentally, physically, there were only a few acceptable explanations. Exhaustion, nervous condition, melancholia, or, if her husband needed legal grounds, hysteria, the catch-all diagnosis for anything from trauma to anemia to simple, justified despair. Treatment options included isolation, cold baths, bleeding, laudanum, forced feeding, bed rest so prolonged it became a form of erasure, and always the reminder that her suffering was her own fault, for wanting too much, for speaking too plainly, for failing to smile through it all. And if she disappeared? If she faded into a sanatorium or a country estate for her health? The family moved on, because the wedding had already happened. The important part was complete. She was replaceable, interchangeable. Only the house missed her. Quietly. Behind the doors she once dusted, under the windows she once stared out of in silence. Let's talk about beauty, shall we? In the Victorian era, beauty isn't just a gift. It's a threat, a promise, a job, and on your wedding day that job becomes full-time. The bride is supposed to be radiant, not happy, not excited. Radiant, which is to say glowing but controlled, emotional but tidy, soft but structured. You must look like the embodiment of all male hopes and zero female thoughts. But achieving that glow, that requires pain. Your corset is tight enough to move organs, literally. The hourglass shape of the era didn't come from nature. It came from compression. You're squeezed inward from every side, your ribs pressed like folded linen. If you faint, that's fine. That's expected. That's elegant. The dress is heavy. Your feet hurt. You haven't eaten a full meal in 2 days. Your gloves are too tight. Your hair has been curled, pinned, teased, and lacquered into position with oils that smell like violets and taste like regret. Your lips are tinted, subtly of course, using a paste that includes carmine, crushed insects, or vinegar. Your cheeks? Pinched, not powdered. Rouge is for actresses. Respectable women achieve colour by lack of air and sheer will. Your skin must be pale, not from health, but from absence of labour. A tan implies outdoor work, which implies poverty, which implies failure. A sickly pallor? Preferable. It suggests refinement, indoor breeding, a body trained to wilt in the sun like good linen. Even your posture is a moral symbol. Slouching isn't just lazy, it's decadent. You're trained to carry yourself like a sculpture. Upright, delicate, still. You're not human today. You're a figurine, a doll in a showcase, blinking behind a veil. Let's talk about the veil. It's romantic, right? Mysterious, symbolic, soft. But it's also a shroud. Veils were originally used to cover a woman's face until the vows, were sealed. It's not for the bride's benefit. It's to maintain her modesty, her value, her mystique. And in arranged marriages, the veil was sometimes practical. If the groom didn't like what he saw, it was too late. The ceremony was done, the cake had been sliced, the marriage had begun. Surprise, you're his now. Lift the veil. Don't react. Smile. It's your duty to be appealing, but not seductive. Pure, but not cold. Beautiful, but not memorable enough to make anyone uncomfortable. Now we arrive at the gift economy of cruelty. Weddings in the Victorian era are not generous. They are strategic. You don't give what someone needs. You give what they will feel obligated to repay. A tea set that's too valuable to use. A portrait of your grandmother, unrequested. A book inscribed with a quote about patience, addressed to someone recently widowed. Even congratulatory notes are weaponized. They arrive on thick cream paper, handwritten in copper plates, full of elegant barbs. To the happy couple, may your union be as fruitful as your mother's before you. Your ceremony was unforgettable. I shall try. Let us hope your new home is large enough for all the opinions you've inherited. These aren't insults. They're reminders of place, of history, of what happens to women who forget who's watching. Let's look at domestic performance. The wedding might be over, but your role is just beginning. Your home becomes your theatre, and every day is opening night. You welcome guests with the same speech, the same smile, the same tray of identical biscuits. Your drawing room is staged, the pillows fluffed, the books angled, the vases filled with flowers that shed no scent and require no watering. Your servants rehearse cues. One opens the door, another takes the coat. A third serves tea at the precise moment conversation begins to lag. It is not a home, it is a salon. And you? You are the hostess. You must never let the mask slip. If your husband is late, you do not pace. You read. If the roast is burnt, you laugh. You blame the firewood. If your cousin insults you at tea, you smile and say, "How vivid." If the roof leaks, you apologise to your guests. Not about the leak, about the disruption. Every setback is a test of your poise. The more composed you remain, the more people will trust that you're winning, even as the house groans and your sense of self dissolves in lemon polish. Let's talk about public sincerity, or the complete lack thereof. Sincerity is dangerous. If you speak plainly about joy, about fear, about boredom, you risk seeming unstable. Feelings are fine, as long as they're packaged, smoothed, endorsed. You may say you're nervous, never scared. You may say you're unsure, never wrong. You may say you're tired, never overwhelmed. You may say you're looking forward to your future. Never, "I don't want this." Anything beyond that is improper, alarming, rude. And so you learn to speak in code, to flatten truth into pleasantry, to tell people what they expect, not what you know. You smile when someone says your dress is modest. You nod when a friend asks if you're excited to start a family. You thank your new husband's aunt for the silver fish slicer you will never use and already hate. It's not lying, it's culture, and everyone's doing it. Let's not forget the absurd rituals of masculine pride. While the bride is transformed into a morally sculpted blossom of civility, the groom's job is to show up, preferably sober, preferably clean, ideally with a vague air of financial stability and enough hair to satisfy the local cousins. His speech at the wedding breakfast is expected to be short, charming, and peppered with just enough sentiment to appear warm, but not so much that he seems unmanly. He may mention his bride's grace, her light, or her virtue. Anything more descriptive might raise eyebrows. Anything less, and Aunt Frances will start telling people the marriage is arranged. His actual role? It begins and ends with appearances. He must appear successful, generous, slightly amused. If he does more, he's interfering. If he does less, he's busy. Either way, he's praised. If he's dull, that's fine. If he's cruel, that's unfortunate. If he's absent, That's complicated. If he's gay, well, that's not to be discussed. Ever. At all, especially if it's true. Everyone knows someone like that. And everyone agrees to pretend they don't. Let's finish today's descent with ceremonial absurdity. The music must be classical, but not too Catholic. The menu must be generous, but not exotic. The wedding cake must be tiered, white, and tall enough to communicate respectability, but not so tall it suggests ambition. And the final absurdity, you're told it's the happiest day of your life, which means, statistically, it's all downhill from here. You nod, you smile, you say thank you, and you hope that's not true. Let's begin at the ending. You've said your vows, you've eaten the cake, you've smiled until the muscles in your face feel like they're holding back a scream. The guests have gone, the candles have guttered, the lace has wilted. You are now officially a wife. And now comes the absurdity of what that actually means. Because beneath the surface of all the pageantry, the flowers, the formal addresses, and the tedious moral applause, there's a gnawing truth. No one told you what to do next. You were trained to arrive here, not to exist here. You were raised to become a bride, not a person. And so you stand in the centre of your new home, your new life, your new title, and you wait. For what? For instruction, for transformation, for the sudden sense that all the months of embroidery and etiquette and emotional gymnastics were building towards something real. But instead, nothing happens, just silence and chores, and a slow realization that your life now consists of hosting other people who are equally as confused. Let's explore the horror of being congratulated for disappearing. You did everything right. You wore the dress. You made the right number of jokes. You accepted the ugly heirloom lamp from your cousin without crying. You said your vows in perfect diction and pretended the lace veil didn't itch. And everyone said you were perfect, which is Victorian for you didn't cause a scene, which is cultural for you were quiet enough that we could keep pretending everything is fine. You were praised for how little of yourself remained visible, how efficiently you sublimated your personality into hospitality, how beautifully you folded yourself down to fit the shape of the occasion. And that is what they will remember, not the strange emptiness of the walk down the aisle, not the way your stomach flipped when your husband's hand closed around yours like a contract, not the moment, late in the evening, when you laughed too loudly and someone gave you a look. No, they'll remember the illusion of joy, the aesthetic of unity. You've now joined a long line of women who became symbols the moment they said, I do. Let's dive into the quiet rituals of containment. Because once the wedding is done, the world shrinks. The house becomes your country. The schedule becomes your doctrine. The expectations become your commandments. You wake, dress, prepare breakfast, whether you eat it or not. You check the flowers. You scan the pantry. You ask the maid to open the windows at the correct angle so the neighbours can see that you are alive and respectable. You set the table. You press your gloves. You sit alone on a velvet chair that cost more than your cousin's entire wedding, and you wait for someone to notice that you're vanishing, but they don't, because this is what's supposed to happen. You were never meant to thrive. You were meant to host. You were never meant to speak. You were meant to greet. You were never meant to feel. You were meant to represent. You are the human equivalent of a well-dressed mantel clock, elegant, expensive, and silent. Let's return to the farce of marital intimacy. Because yes, The wedding night is over, but the expectation lingers. You are now presumed to be participating in physical intimacy with a man you may barely know. The frequency of this participation is discussed, never directly, by older women with tight smiles and phrases like earning your rest or keeping the home fires burning. You are expected to perform this aspect of marriage too, to maintain a soft glow, to speak of your husband with fondness, never specificity, to radiate maternal potential without acknowledging the process of becoming pregnant. And if it goes badly, you don't talk about it, ever. There is no support group, no literature, no conversation. You either bear it quietly or you become a cautionary tale. A woman who couldn't manage, a wife who lost interest in her duties, a house that grew cold, and if it goes well, then you're suspected of enjoying it too much, of being worldly, knowing, fast. There is no winning. There is only adjusting your expression to match what people already believe about you. Now let's visit the parlour of false intimacy. This is where you entertain. Host. Invite other women over for tea and discuss nothing in particular with extreme intensity. You will talk about jam. You will talk about fabric. You will talk about who is newly married, newly pregnant, newly widowed, newly out of favour. You will not talk about loneliness. You will not talk about regret. You will not talk about the feeling that your life has become a decorative cage. And if you ever try to, if you ever so much as suggest that perhaps all this pageantry is exhausting, that your life feels less like a romance and more like a slow, tasteful funeral, you will be offered advice, not empathy, advice. Take a tonic. Go to bath. Have a child. That always helps. Try embroidery. It focuses the mind. You're never allowed to simply be sad. Sadness implies something's wrong. And if something's wrong, then the system might not be perfect. And we can't have that. Let's end with the most absurd ritual of all, the anniversary. 1 year later, you will be expected to commemorate the day of your erasure. You will receive flowers. You will write notes of thanks. You will host a small gathering. You will smile politely as someone asks how marriage has changed you. And you will lie, because the truth is too strange, too embarrassing, too shapeless to name. You'll say, it's been wonderful. You'll say, time flies. You'll say, he's very kind. You won't say, I barely recognise myself. I feel like a wax figure with good posture. Sometimes I sit alone and try to remember what it felt like to want something. You'll sip your tea. You'll laugh on cue. You'll keep playing the role. Because in this theatre of scented letters and solemn china, there is no final act. Only the long, gentle hum of someone fading out of their own story. You wake up. It's been weeks, maybe months. Time doesn't move anymore, not in the way it used to. It drifts, slides, wraps around you like the folds of your night dress, always a little damp with sleep or weather or worry. You wake up and the room is pale. Cream curtains, washed out walls, a mirror that's begun to forget your name. You think, what now? But you don't say it aloud, because questions here echo. Let's talk about the quiet unravelling. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no dramatic thunderclap, no screaming match, no broken teacup or slammed door. Instead it begins in the corners. A forgotten handkerchief. A letter you meant to answer but didn't. The way your husband says, good morning, but never, how are you? And you start to forget little things. Not because you're careless, but because you no longer know what matters. The difference between the good china and the guest china. The schedule for Tuesdays. The name of the neighbour's dog. You were trained to remember everything, and now you struggle to remember yourself. Let's dwell on the mirror. There's one in every room. It's decorative, of course. Carved. Framed. Tilted just so. You've passed it 1,000 times. But lately, when you glance in, something feels off. The image is yours, yes? The face, the dress, the posture. But the weight of it, the stillness, it unnerves you. You look composed. And yet, there is no sparkle, no momentum, no you. Just someone doing a remarkable impression of a calm, accomplished woman. You lean closer. You study the lines around your mouth, the pale slope of your cheek. You search for the woman who once laughed too loudly at dinner, the girl who used to read novels by candlelight and cry without apology. She is not gone, but she's hiding. She lives behind the veil of your voice. She watches from the windows you forgot how to open. And she's waiting. Let's visit the letters. You used to write so many. Thank yous. Invitations. Notes to your cousins. Casual missives about the weather. Carefully crafted condolences for people you barely knew. Now, you write less. And when you do, the ink feels heavier. It's hard to begin. You stare at the page. You try to summon the old phrases. Hope this finds you well. Sending love from all of us. How are the roses this year? But the words feel like lies. Not cruel ones. Just weightless. You want to write something real. But what would that even look like? Dear Margaret, I think I'm vanishing. Not quickly, just a little more each day. Dear Alice, do you ever feel like your house is eating you? Dear Mama, was this it? Instead you set the pen down. You fold the paper. You tell yourself you'll write tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes never. Never becomes a habit. Let's talk about the unspoken fear. It lives in the furniture, in the pauses between footsteps, in the quiet after your husband clears his throat and leaves the room. It's not the fear of danger. Not exactly. It's the fear of being unseen. Of going your whole life doing what's expected and never being truly known. Of living in a home where everything is embroidered and nothing is honest. Of aging into someone no one remembers was once alive. This fear doesn't scream. It whispers. In the kitchen, while you arrange the silver. In the garden, when you forget which plants are yours. At night, when the bed feels too wide on one side and too narrow on the other. You try to ignore it. You host more dinners. You iron the curtains. You visit the chapel. But it's still there. In the hush after the guests leave. In the echo of your own voice asking what time it is, even though you already know. Let's linger now in memory. Not the joyful kind. Not weddings or holidays or dances. But the slippery kind. You remember moments that shouldn't matter. The way your maid gently adjusted your collar one morning without saying a word. The laugh your husband gave once. Only once. That felt like it belonged to a younger man. The day the rain came down so hard, you stayed inside and didn't light the lamps until nightfall. Small. Forgettable. And yet, these are the moments that feel real. Not the ceremony. Not the gifts. Not the speeches. Just pauses. Human things. Half glances. Quiet griefs. You start to collect them. Keep them inside you like scraps of old lace. Too frayed to use. Too precious to throw away. Let's shift now to self-betrayal. Because here's the thing no one says. At some point, you start helping it happen. The erasure. You stop speaking up. You stop trying to explain. You smile when you don't mean it. You praise things that make you ache. You defend people who forget your name. Not because you're weak, Not because you've given up, but because it's easier. Because fighting every moment of the day exhausts you. And silence at least feels elegant. You don't want to be angry anymore. Anger curls inward, sour and heavy, like bad cream. You want peace, or something close enough. So you start to believe the compliments. You start to think maybe they're right. Maybe being quiet is a kind of strength. Maybe invisibility is a virtue. Maybe this house is a gift. You nod. You host. You disappear. One polite phrase at a time. But deep down, something aches. A question, soft and steady. If I left, would they notice? Let's not answer yet. Let's pause. Let's sit quietly, the way they taught you. Back straight. Hands folded. Eyes on the window. And listen to the wind. To the creak of the hallway. To the sound of your own breath in a room too still to be alive. You're not lost. Not yet. But the map is fading. You're still here. The days move, but you don't. Not really. You dress. You pour tea. You smile. You listen. You adjust the curtains so the afternoon light hits the carpet in the most flattering way. You speak in complete sentences. You thank people for things you didn't want. You apologise for the weather, the dust, the creak in the stairs. And all the while, you're waiting for something. You don't know what. Let's talk about numbness. The Victorian version. You are not allowed to be broken, but you are allowed to be delicate. So that's the word they give you. You are delicate. You get lightheaded. You need air. You require rest after long conversations. You avoid strong perfumes. You sit when the weather changes. You recline when the light is too bright. You close your eyes when someone says something cruel and call it a moment. This is how you survive. Not by resisting, but by learning the language of acceptable collapse. You're always just tired enough to excuse the silence. Let's drift now into routine grief. Not dramatic grief, not cinematic grief, but the soft, daily kind that has no clear origin. The grief of waking up and realising you're the same. The grief of remembering your own handwriting and not recognising it. The grief of sitting across from your husband and having nothing left to say. Not out of anger, but absence. You grieve for things no one would call a loss. The sound of your own unguarded laugh. The books you once loved, but stopped reading because they made you ache. The version of yourself that used to hum while getting dressed. This grief doesn't cry. It lingers. It hangs on you like a shawl that never warms. It dulls the edges of everything. It turns music into noise, food into texture, affection into duty. You become a master of appearing whole. People compliment your grace, your calm, your strength. No one asks why you always change the subject when someone says the word hope. Let's walk now through the dreamscape. You begin to dream again. Not vividly, not violently, but insistently. The dreams are soft, faded, strange. You're in a house that isn't yours. You open a door that leads to the sky. You try to speak, but the room fills with water. You're at a table and everyone is waiting for you to say something, but your mouth is full of dust. You wake up before the ending, always, with a weight in your chest and the taste of an idea you've already lost. Sometimes the dreams leave behind a phrase, a half sentence. She was almost... The door was open. If you turn back, but when you try to remember it, it disappears, like everything else. Let's explore how people stop asking. At first they asked how you were, if you liked married life, if the house was comfortable, if he was kind. You gave the correct answers, and they smiled. And after a while, they stopped asking. Because you had proven you were fine. And in Victorian society, once someone appears fine long enough, they are declared fine, permanently. Even if their hands shake when folding linen, even if they forget which day the market comes, even if they haven't smiled without effort in 8 months, your silence becomes part of the wallpaper. Your sadness becomes tasteful. Your life becomes invisible. And no one knocks anymore. Let's turn now to the strange freedom of fading. Because here's the part no one tells you. At some point, the absence becomes familiar. And in a dark, quiet way, it feels like safety. There is no pressure in absence, no sharpness, no heat, just the gentle pull of not being needed. You stop correcting the maid when she forgets the sugar. You stop adjusting the flowers on the mantel. You stop rereading your mother's last letter. You stop pretending you care about what happens to the parlour rug. You do what's required, nothing more. And people call it serenity. They say she's so composed. They say she's found peace. They say she's become exactly what a wife should be. But they never ask what it cost. Let's stand now in the attic. You don't go up there often. Too many boxes. Too many memories. Too many drafts that smell like old ideas. But one day, maybe it's raining, maybe you're bored. You climb the narrow stairs and push open the warped door. And there it is. The past. Folded. Packed. Labelled. Forgotten. You open a box. Inside is a book you loved once. The one with the heroine who ran away. You flip to the last page. The spine cracks. The paper smells like defiance. You open another box. Letters. Your handwriting. Jokes. Plans. Questions. A sketch of a dress you never made. You sit down, and for the first time in a long time, you remember who you were before you became polite. You remember colour. You remember wanting things. You remember laughter that hurt your sides and questions that had no answers. You remember you. And for a moment, just a moment, you grieve it fully, not in silence, but with your whole chest. No one sees you. No one interrupts. No one asks if you're unwell. And in that privacy, something opens. Not hope. Not yet. Just space. And space, after so much shrinking, feels like a miracle. Let's start with something small. The way your fingers pause, mid-fold, when you brush against a fabric you haven't worn in years. The blue one. The one with the slightly too low collar and the buttons that used to misbehave. You shouldn't still have it. It doesn't match who you're supposed to be now. It doesn't say wife or household or decorum. It says remember. You press it gently back into the drawer. But your hands remember the weight, the feeling of movement, of stepping out of the house too fast, too sure, too bold, before you learned that boldness was best repackaged as charm or good taste. Let's speak now of the internal monologue, the one that never quite stops, no matter how well trained you've become. It whispers. Not rebellions, not revolutions. Just, this is not what I pictured. This can't be all there is. Is it wrong that I feel nothing? And then, louder, against your will, I want more. You don't say it aloud, of course. You've learned what happens when women ask questions like that. They get rephrased, repackaged, sent back with a ribbon that says, try prayer, or jam making, so you keep it inside, but it grows. Not into anger, not into action, into awareness. And awareness, quiet, still, unspoken, is dangerous. Let's go now to the library. It's not yours, but it's here. A room of books that no one reads, except perhaps your husband once, back when he had ambitions. You sit there sometimes, when no one is looking. You run your fingers along the spines, not looking for answers, not expecting salvation, just touching the past, the ideas, the lives that got written down. You find a passage you once underlined, something about oceans, or stars, or choices, and you read it again, slowly, and something clicks. Not loudly, not enough to change anything, but enough to remember that your brain is still alive, not just functioning, yearning. Let's turn to the final disconnection. You and your husband are polite, that's all. You speak, you coordinate, you sleep in the same room, you maintain the facade. But he doesn't see you anymore, not out of cruelty, but habit. He sees the dinner. He sees the children. He sees the letter you left by his chair reminding him of his appointment. But he doesn't see you. And, truthfully, you don't see him either. Not really. He has become an echo, a shape in the hallway, a warm body next to you at dinner, who knows what time you like your tea, but not why you wake up at 3 a.m. with your hand clenched around nothing. You sit across from him some evenings and imagine asking simply, "Do you still love me?" But you already know the answer. He never hated you. He never lied. He simply followed the same path you did, quietly, faithfully, until you both arrived at the same locked room and decided not to look each other in the eye. Let's enter the chapel, the one at the edge of the village, the one with the cold pews and the thin, sharp light. You go there sometimes when no one expects it. Midweek, mid-afternoon. Not to pray, not really, but to sit. To let the silence be something other than emptiness. You sit in the back, hands folded, eyes open. There is no choir, no sermon, no movement. Just the wind through the cracks in the stone, the smell of old wood and wax, the memory of something higher, not necessarily divine, just larger than you. And for a second, in that brittle, unspectacular moment, you feel something that almost resembles peace. Not joy, not clarity, not healing, but stillness. The stillness of someone who knows exactly where she is, even if she doesn't know where she's going. Let's end in the mirror. One last time. You stand before it, not dressed for a party, not wearing anything anyone else picked. Just yourself, soft, undone, undraped. You look. And this time you don't look past the reflection. You see it, the lines, the hollows, the curve of a mouth that has said thousands of polite lies and still remembers how to curse under its breath. You do not look beautiful. You do not look young, but you look real. You blink. And in that blink, brief, delicate, something returns. Not loudly, not fully, but enough. Enough to remind you that you are not completely gone. That beneath the etiquette, the linens, the guest lists, the half-spoken griefs, something endured, a self, a voice, maybe faint, maybe flickering, but still stubbornly here. The house is still. Somewhere down the hall, a clock chimes. You lose count halfway through. Your hands are folded. Your breathing is slow. Your name, the full one, the one you whispered once in a field before any of this began, sits quietly at the back of your mind, like a guest who never left. There's nothing left to do tonight. The list is finished. The doors are locked. The curtains are drawn. The weight of the day slips off your shoulders like a shawl someone else put there. And the silence, it stays, but not unkindly, just completely. Good night. Sleep well, and may you dream of something louder than lace.